Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Elizabeth Johnson. Elizabeth Johnson was 23 years old, and her husband was 25. They lived in Tempe, Arizona, USA. Although on the surface they appear to be a happy couple, their reality is much different. Elizabeth's life has been through many hardships, which have negatively impacted her relationships. Her parents were addicted to illegal substances and barely cared for her, forcing her to grow up in poverty. Fortunately, her time in this dreadful environment was short-lived. Her mother passed away when she was still young, drowning after losing consciousness from an overdose of illegal drugs. At that time, her father was also in a state of madness and could not help her. A few years later, her father died from liver disease, which was also linked to his addictions. After these incidents, Elizabeth was sent to an orphanage. Several families adopted her, but then they returned her to the orphanage. These childhood damage caused Elizabeth much suffering. She had behavioral problems and was often labeled a problem child. Now she's faced with adult problems that she doesn't know how to handle. Those who knew her well said she was immature for her age, and she lived in constant fear of abandonment. This fear made her intensely jealous of her boyfriend, Logan. Elizabeth had difficulty controlling her emotions, leading to severe psychological stress. This often resulted in conflicts with her lover, Logan. During these conflicts, she frequently lost control and sometimes physically attacked him. Her immaturity made her unable to understand her own actions. Despite this, Logan loved her, and they got married after dating for a few months. He hopes that marriage will help she change. Unfortunately, her fear grew and her tantrums became very disturbing. For example, during a picnic, they had a fight, and Logan narrowly avoided falling into the fire. He only suffered minor burns. However, when she wasn't aggressive, they seemed like a great couple. Treat each other well and have the ability to become an ideal family. Logan was already suspicious of Elizabeth's change, but he continued to hope for the best. Sometime after the marriage, they discover that Elizabeth is pregnant, which was a big surprise for them. They feel unprepared to become parents. Initially, they had planned to establish themselves before having children, so Elizabeth decided she did not want to become a mother. However, she later changed her mind and chose to continue with the pregnancy. Their son, Gabriel, was born on May 3, 2009. Unfortunately, this did nothing to make Elizabeth more mature. She still behaved like a child. According to those around her, her anger outbursts became unpredictable. During these times, she would latch on to minor issues to provoke conflicts. Gabriel is quite difficult, and she has to try very hard to control him. The boy always wanted to be comforted, and whenever Elizabeth left him alone, he would start crying. His cries irritated her, causing her to lose her temper and yell. It was a chaotic situation, and Logan trying to stay calm for the sake of the child. During that period, Logan worked hard to support his young family, which often kept him away from home. At home, he always tries to help his wife and take care of the children. He wanted to be close to his son, but Elizabeth's temperament made things difficult. Not only was she as volatile as before, but baby constant crying and irritability made her ready to lash out at Logan over minor issues. Her jealousy increased. She becomes more suspicious of Logan's interactions with other women. Her fear of being abandoned turned into panic, haunting her. Everything is getting worse and worse. Elizabeth accused Logan of loving their son, Gabriel, too much. She even grew jealous of the child, convinced that Logan loved her less since his birth. During her angry outbursts, her behavior became more extreme. She started smashing things, including household appliances and dishes. On one occasion, she even took a kitchen knife and cut up the sofa and her son's bed. Logan finds it very difficult living in such an environment. During these episodes, he feared for his life and the safety of the son. He wanted to be close to his child, but he didn't want to continue to endure Elizabeth's anger. Finally, he ran out of patience, especially when Elizabeth didn't change. After a few months of living like this, Logan announced that he wanted a divorce and moved out with his son, Gabriel. Elizabeth's childhood fears and traumas return, but she never takes responsibility for what happened. Instead, she blamed her husband, Logan, calling him narrow-minded. Worst of all, she began to threaten to give Gabriel up for adoption. Logan assured her that he could take care of the baby himself, making such an action unnecessary. Unfortunately, Elizabeth saw this as a new way to manipulate the situation and frequently used this threat against Logan. When Logan consulted a lawyer, he learned that by law, Elizabeth could not arbitrarily let someone else adopt their son, Gabriel. If the child's biological father disagreed, they would need to settle custody arrangements in court. Elizabeth could have given full custody to he, but she didn't want to. She just wanted to control him longer and get revenge. Eventually, they divorced, and they were granted joint custody. However, her erratic behavior made he feel it was unsafe for their son, Gabriel, to stay with her, so he sought full custody. This process took time. Meanwhile, the boy lived with his father, and his mother visited him according to their agreement. Over time, Elizabeth seemed to become less anxious and calmer. What happened at Elizabeth's house when Logan wasn't there was unclear. The situation might have been worsening. As Christmas approached, Logan planned to spend the holiday with his family. He had a grand vacation in mind. They would meet Santa Claus and give Gabriel his first Christmas presents. But this plan was not to be. On December 18, 2009, Logan was supposed to pick up Gabriel from Elizabeth's house around 4 p.m. However, when he arrived, no one opened the door and the car was not in the driveway. This was strange, because they had planned that he would visit and he will take Gabriel away. Then, he continued to knock. By this point, they had a well-established custody arrangement for the child. Everyone was accustomed to it, so Elizabeth's actions seemed unusual. She couldn't just take Gabriel and go wherever she pleased. Logan looked through the bedroom window and saw furniture boxes scattered and emptied on the floor. He thinks she's gone crazy again. She must have packed her things and taken Gabriel away to an unknown location, so he became very worried and immediately contacted the police. Unfortunately, by law, nothing could be done because Elizabeth was Gabriel's biological mother. She was the child's legal guardian. The authorities ignored Logan's worries. Although this made him feel discomfort, he was forced to go home. For the following days, nobody managed to reach Elizabeth. She remained silent. No one understood what had happened, making the situation more complicated. Only Logan and his family were interested in the search. The police ignored his warnings that Elizabeth could be a danger to Gabriel. He had no choice but to do everything to contact she. Unexpectedly, on December 27th, he received a message from an unknown number, but it was clear it was from Elizabeth. She wrote that he would never find his beloved son, Gabriel. She was leaving the country, and when she arrived, she would send him the exact address where he could find Gabriel's body. She also added that, earlier, she had strangled her son, Gabriel. After hearing these words, Logan could barely stand, but he immediately called the unknown number. At first, Elizabeth ignored those calls, but finally answered on the 6th attempt. Logan insisted that she was lying and that Gabriel was fine. However, Elizabeth claimed to have strangled the baby and put it in a trash bag with diapers and then threw it into a dumpster. She said it was revenge for his countless betrayals. After this, Logan contacted the police, but to his surprise, he was again told that they could do nothing. The police did not take what Elizabeth said seriously. The next day, the police got involved because Elizabeth will have to attend the final trial for custody of Gabriel, but she did not appear in court as expected. So they started looking for her. They quickly determined she had gone to San Antonio, Texas. Shortly after moving there, she sought employment and attended a nightclub casting to become a dancer. Other dancers remembered her well and identified her from photographs. She was seen attending the casting alone, without Gabriel. However, after that, she did not appear. From the first time we met, everyone realized that she had a very bad personality. Detectives found that Elizabeth had tried to get jobs at 2 nightclubs at the same time. However, then, her actions became puzzling because she didn't start working at either place. Investigators tried to determine the last time she was with Gabriel before she called Logan to report the murder. From trip records, they learned that on December 27th, she bought a bus ticket traveling between states. Gabriel did not accompany her on this trip from San Antonio to Florida. The investigation brought them to Miami on December 29th, where Elizabeth was arrested at a motel. Investigators questioned her about Gabriel's whereabouts and interrogated her about messages and a call to Logan. She denied the accusations, claiming she only wanted to annoy and get back at he. She mentioned she was heading to San Antonio to meet a couple interested in adoption. This was actually about illegally handing over a child to strangers. She claimed that she spent 3 days with they to ensure they were suitable and capable of caring for Gabriel. On the 3rd day, they met at a park. She gave Gabriel to they and left to begin a new life. She couldn't recall their names or contact details. But after some thought, she mentioned that the woman might be named Cheryl. It all sounds unreasonable, and the most confusing thing is that Elizabeth decided to leave Gabriel with a stranger, while Logan wanted to take care of the boy himself. Why is it necessary to separate the child from the father and find another family to raise the boy? That is illegal. Elizabeth had no answers to these questions. Law enforcement officers searched the San Antonio landfill using specially trained dogs, as there was a chance that the tip given to Logan was true. However, Gabriel's body was not found there. Then, authorities focused their attention on a family suspected of illegally adopting Gabriel. For Logan, this lead was his last hope of finding his son alive. Logan recalled a similar incident 6 months earlier. On that occasion, she went to the airport with Gabriel, seemingly planning to start a new life. Luckily, she didn't make it to the plane and was arrested by the police for trying to kidnap Gabriel. Elizabeth recounted that she cried a lot at the airport. And then, she met a 40-year-old woman named Tammy Smith. Seeing her hugging Gabriel and crying, Tammy decided to comfort her by expressing sympathy. She confided in Tammy that she felt incapable of being a good mother to her baby. Tammy then asked if she was considering giving her baby up for adoption. At first, she insisted that she wouldn't do it. Despite this, she and Tammy became friends after their encounter. They shared many similarities, particularly a difficult past. Tammy had worked as a dancer in a strip club and had been married to 2 men simultaneously at one point. She had a deep fear of being alone, which negatively impacted her life and relationships. She had been married 5 times and had 3 children with different men. All her children lived with their biological fathers, and she had lost parental rights. Unexpectedly, after 2001, changes occurred in Tammy's life. She decides that she really wants to raise her child and get her child back. There was no longer an opportunity to give birth again. So she turned to the services of the black market. During the investigation, it was established that Tammy adopted 2 children and was constantly looking for young mothers with problems so that she could adopt more children. She used social networks to persuade young women to give up their children and even approached pregnant women on the street, asking if they were planning to give up the child. After talking with Tammy, Elizabeth decided to give Gabriel up for adoption. Tammy became Gabriel's mother. When Logan learned of this, he immediately reported it to the police. Gabriel was taken from the Temi home and returned to live with his father Logan. Temi claimed that she did not know about the falsification of the adoption documents. Logan attempted to obtain custody to prevent Elizabeth from being able to see Gabriel again. However, the process dragged on for 6 months, which ultimately led to Gabriel's disappearance. After being arrested, Elizabeth launched a public relations campaign to support herself while awaiting trial. She frequently communicated with the media, gave interviews, and blamed Logan for the incident. She argues that if he agrees to let Temi adopt Gabriel, none of this would have happened. Logan was shocked by her actions, which he perceived as driven by revenge. During the custody trial, he repeatedly sought sole custody, as he was the primary caregiver. Elizabeth wasn't interested in the boy and just wanted to get rid of him. Despite this, the court awarded joint custody. He tried to challenge this decision, but the court did not agree. After several months, Elizabeth faced multiple charges, including forging Logan's signature on adoption documents. However, the court considered this a minor crime, so it only imposed a 30-day prison sentence for signature forgery. During this time, the custody trial concluded. He was given full custody of Gabriel, but he still has no idea where the boy is. Investigators found no evidence of a crime, such as blood stains on the car, and did not find Gabriel's body. So they began to suspect that there might be a black market in child trafficking involved. This theory seemed plausible, since San Antonio is statistically a hub for black markets. Elizabeth had been in the city for some time, so it is likely that she had contact with organizations involved in child trafficking. During this time, she lived in a motel with her child, Gabriel, but later moved out without him. This is a common tactic used by these organizations, which often conduct exchanges in inexpensive motels to avoid drawing attention. Suspicion was heightened by the fact that Elizabeth had no relatives or acquaintances in San Antonio, suggesting her choice of location was deliberate. These factors all corroborate the initial story the detective shared after her arrest, suggesting that Gabriel may have been with strangers. The biggest challenge was keeping track of the child, which was almost impossible, as he was so young. There were several indirect signs. After arriving in San Antonio, Elizabeth posted on social media that if you want to do something, you will find a way to do it. In another post, she mentioned starting a new life. Later, she shared a photo showing 2 diamond rings. Logan knew she couldn't afford such expensive jewelry, valued at over $20,000. Elizabeth claimed they were gifts from admirers, but this seemed unlikely. This new information supports the theory that she sold Gabriel illegally, as payments for such transactions are not typically made in cash. During the investigation, the detectives contacted a young woman who had worked part-time as a nanny for Elizabeth when she first arrived in San Antonio with Gabriel. The girl was hired through an ad and looked after Gabriel for a day. She was shocked by how indifferent Elizabeth was to her son. Elizabeth didn't care if he was tired, needed sleep, or was hungry. The only thing Elizabeth requested was to give the boy medicine regularly to keep him quiet. Elizabeth simply wanted him to remain silent. The type of medication was unknown, but it was likely a sedative. Elizabeth spent 3 years in prison before her trial began. Initially, she was charged with kidnapping, but this charge was dropped. At that time, the law allowed a mother with joint custody to move across the country with her child, so it wasn't illegal. She was later charged with endangering Gabriel's life. The trial lasted 2 days, after which the jury found Elizabeth guilty. She was sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in prison. This decision angered many people. Logan was shocked when his 7-month-old son, Gabriel, goes missing, but Elizabeth is given only a light sentence. The prosecutor's office said they had no evidence to prove Elizabeth harmed or killed Gabriel, so no other charges could be brought against Elizabeth. Elizabeth denied the story she told Logan over the phone after Gabriel's disappearance. She continued to deny murdering her son, claiming instead that she gave the child to a couple. She explained that the message and call were meant to anger Logan. And she lied about the boy's body being in the dump. Detectives repeatedly questioned her in prison, trying to get information about Gabriel. Throughout this time, she never cooperated with the investigation, nor did she share anything with Logan or her lawyer. Elizabeth insisted that she knew nothing about Gabriel's condition. She also has no interest in knowing what happened to her son or where he is now. Logan was convinced that the child had been dead for a long time, believing she had indeed disposed of him at the dump, as she mentioned in the message. A recording of a phone conversation between Elizabeth and her old friend Temmie surfaced. Elizabeth was aware that all prison calls were recorded, so she deliberately lied to distract the detectives. During the call, she praised the detectives for their work but then expressed outrage. Then, she confesses that Temmie ruined her life. Temmie got her involved in illegal activities. Temmie's reaction seemed genuine, as she denied all of Elizabeth's accusations. The two women ended up blaming each other for their problems, which ultimately ended their friendship. It remains unclear who was lying during the call. In 2014, Elizabeth was released from prison and placed on probation for 3 years. However, she repeatedly violated the terms. Just a month later, she moved to New Mexico, which was a serious violation since she was required to regularly report to her probation officer. As a result, Elizabeth was arrested and extradited back. She was briefly imprisoned again. Meanwhile, the search for Gabriel continued, without success. Police occasionally receive new leads, but all lead to dead ends, including DNA analysis, reviewing CCTV footage, tracking geolocation, and searching databases. No matter how hard they tried, the boy was never found. After serving her prison sentence, Elizabeth was released. She changed her name several times to start anew and eventually got married, settling in New Mexico. In May 2021, she became pregnant again. This caused controversy. Many criticized Elizabeth, believing she shouldn't become a mother again, fearing she might abandon or harm the child. When speaking to reporters, Elizabeth continued to deny all allegations. In an interview, she claimed that her worst punishment wasn't prison but living without knowing Gabriel's fate. She insisted she had changed and regretted giving her child away, but few believed her. Gabriel's father, Logan, has devoted a great deal of time, effort, and resources to searching for his son. Years later, he had a new family, but he still hoped to find his first child. Although Logan tried his best, but the fate of Gabriel remains a mystery known only to Elizabeth. Logan continues to hope that Elizabeth will eventually reveal the truth so he can find his son. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Amy Carnevale. Amy Carnevale was born on April 13th of this year in Beverly, Massachusetts, USA. Her father was a science teacher at a local school, and her mother worked as an investment consultant. Amy had a brother, Christopher, who was born 4 years earlier. Their family was very close-knit, supporting each other during difficult times. However, a few years after Amy's birth, tensions began to rise in the family. Eventually, her parents decided to divorce. At the time, Amy was just 6 years old, and the news was a huge shock for her. She struggled with her feelings for a while but eventually came to accept the situation. When she started school, it marked a new hopeful chapter in her life. Throughout this period, her family maintained their connection with her, which helped ease the emotional effects of her parents' separation. Amy was a beautiful and intelligent girl who became popular at school. She joined the cheerleading team and played field hockey. Friendly and sociable. Despite her busy social life, she had a deep love for nature and enjoyed spending time outdoors. Amy often combined her passion for nature with sports by playing golf with her father. Although she lived with her mother, she had a strong and positive relationship with her father. Amy dreams of becoming a hairstylist or hairdresser because she enjoys making her friends look beautiful. At this point in her life, she is preparing to enter high school, and she is a member of the school's cheerleading squad. She recently met a boy named Jamie Fuller at a friend's party. Amy was 12 years old, and Jamie was 14 at the time. It was well known that Jamie was a difficult person and often disrupted the peace at school. While he wasn't aggressive or malicious, some of his jokes crossed the line. Amy's parents disapproved of the relationship, thinking he was not good enough for her. When they first met, he was a skinny guy. But later he decided to get fit and build muscle to impress others. In pursuit of this, he chose to use steroids to accelerate his progress. Their relationship faced frequent challenges. There were times when they wouldn't speak for weeks but would eventually get back together. However, after he began using steroids, Amy and her friends noticed significant changes in his behavior. Jamie became increasingly aggressive and unpredictable. Their arguments grew more common, occurring both at school and outside of it. Jamie's treatment of Amy deteriorated, and some of his friends reported that he made hurtful comments that she did not deserve. Things got worse. At Amy's age, she didn't know what to focus on in a relationship or how to fight back against her boyfriend's controlling behavior. Jamie acted like he was in charge, trying to control every aspect of her life. Jamie began dictating who she could talk to and wanted to know where she was at all times. He even tried to create conflict between her and her closest friends and family. Jamie became increasingly controlling, telling her what to wear, how to look, and who she could be friends with. He tried to cut her off from school sports teams. Even though Amy complied with his demands, he continued to find new ways to insult and provoke her. Amy's friends often witnessed the humiliation she faced at Jamie's hands. Since 2020, several states have enacted laws classifying manipulative and controlling behavior as a crime. Research shows that this behavior often marks the beginning of a dangerous path that can lead to physical violence or even death for the victim. Unfortunately, at that time, had nothing to charge against him. Despite the fact that her friends were very worried about what was happening, Jamie's behavior became increasingly unpredictable, and problems with the law began. In the 90s, he was arrested twice for armed assault on a person. However, due to his age and lack of previous offenses, Jamie got away with it. He also convinced his girlfriend to keep quiet about these incidents. During this time, Amy did not share much about her relationship difficulties with others. She and Jamie frequently broke up and got back together, indicating that their relationship was in trouble. Jamie eventually left and Amy informed her friends of the breakup, but they reconciled soon after. Amy rarely shared her problems, partly because she was raised by her mother, who worked long hours and could not fully deal with her daughter's personal problems. Therefore, Amy kept her feelings to herself. At the same time, they were dealing with housing issues after a long period of renting. During this time, Amy stayed with various friends and lived with Diane Viggers, one of Jamie's ex-girlfriends. Despite this relationship, they became good friends. The situation was expected to improve on September 5, 1991, when Amy, her mother, and brother prepared to move into their new home. They had been renting for a long time, which had put a strain on their family finances, making this move a much-anticipated change in their lives. Amy had been living with her friend Diane before this incident. After breaking up with her manipulative boyfriend again, she was determined not to get back together with him. That day, she attended another field hockey practice and excitedly told her friends about her decision to end the toxic relationship for good. However, she mentioned that her ex-boyfriend, Jamie, kept calling her. Although she tried to ignore him, he was persistent. He wanted to see her, but she refused. He eventually asked her if she would like to cut his hair as a farewell gesture to their past relationship. After some consideration, she agreed and made plans to visit Jamie that evening, planning to return home a few hours later. Amy did not come home on time, and Diane was very worried about her. Amy was only 14 years old, so the delay made her friend increasingly worried. Diane called Amy's mother, and she could not find her daughter either. Their concerns increased when they discovered that Amy had left her purse and personal belongings behind, indicating that she did not intend to be gone for long. After waiting until morning, they decided to contact the police. After arriving at the police station, Amy's mother made plans to meet Jamie, whom Amy was supposed to meet. Jamie was cooperative from the start. He spoke to both the mother and the police and answered their questions openly. He even joined in the search efforts in the area. Despite being the prime suspect in Amy's disappearance, no evidence of her has ever been found. Searches of Jamie's home and car have turned up nothing. On August 28, 1991, an anonymous informant contacted the police station, claiming to know the location of Amy's body. This revelation caught the police's attention, and they were keen to find out the identity of this informant and the source of his information. The informant was identified as 19-year-old Michael Melita, a friend of Jamie's. When the police arrived at his home, he promptly agreed to assist with the investigation. At the police department, he confessed everything he knew about the tragic events of August 23. He explained that on August 22, the day before, Amy had planned to go to the beach with her friends. Jamie discovered her plans and grew angry. Fearing that there would be other guys at the beach party, his jealousy intensified. He felt restless and wanted to control Amy. On that same day, he met with Michael and voiced his wish to kill his ex-girlfriend. Multiple individuals were aware of Jamie's harmful intentions, yet none reported these plans to the police. They failed to warn Amy or her parents about the potential threat. On the evening of August 23, Amy visited her ex-boyfriend's house, thinking she was just there to get a haircut. However, she found 3 other boys there: 15-year-old Dominic Scola, 19-year-old Michael Melita, and 17-year-old Scott Ward. Just before Amy arrived, Jamie took out a large knife and showed it to the others, saying it was for his ex-girlfriend. He then placed the knife on a dresser. Jamie then suggested that the group take a walk in the nearby woods. During the walk, he and Amy went ahead while the other 3 lost sight of them. Michael confessed that he didn't completely believe Jamie's intentions to harm Amy, but no one felt brave enough to stop him because they were scared. Ultimately, Michael was the only one who ran to the location where Jamie and Amy had gone. He discovered Jamie covered in blood. Amy suffered multiple stab wounds on her chest, back, and stomach. Despite her injuries, she attempted to get up and escape, but her attacker was relentless. Michael mentioned that he didn't hear her screams until it was too late to help her. After Amy, who had her throat cut, collapsed, she continued to fight for her life. In that moment, she managed to say, "Jamie, I love you," which only enraged her attacker further. Jamie then began to stomp on her head. Afterward, Jamie, covered in blood, returned to his friends and described the events in detail while waving a bloody knife. Michael noted that everyone was afraid of becoming the next target, so they supported Jamie's actions. They all went home together, where they spent several hours drinking and talking calmly. Jamie took a shower to wash off the blood and changed his clothes. Jamie and Michael walked into the woods to where Amy's body was left. It was dark by then. They wrapped her body in trash bags and joked about the situation, showing no remorse or regret. When they reached the pond, they tied several concrete blocks together and threw the body into the water from the dock. Jamie made a sarcastic comment as he drowned Amy's body. He then took a bloody bracelet and necklace from her, wiped the blood off them, and wore them around his neck. This behavior is typical of a serial killer who keeps trophies as a reminder of his crimes. After Michael explained everything to the police, he was asked again how he could be involved in Amy's death. He clarified that he did not stab her, he only helped his friend dispose of her body because he was threatened. Michael confessed that he was afraid of Jamie. He believed that if Jamie learned about his conversation with the police, he would be killed. According to Michael, at first, the group thought the idea of murder was a terrible joke, and they only grasped the seriousness of the situation when it was too late. As the situation progressed, the three friends went along with Jamie's plans to avoid provoking him. On August 28, the informant was taken to the pond he had described. Michael pointed out the spot where the body was disposed of. Around 7:30 a.m., divers discovered Amy's body, which was in a shocking condition. It was evident that she had been murdered violently. The forensic expert identified that she was wearing the same clothes she had on the day she went missing. Analysis confirmed that she died on Friday, the evening she disappeared. Additionally, experts validated all of Michael's statements about the injuries on her body. They found about 10 stab wounds and a severe cut to her throat. The police could not find Jamie. Jamie's mother said she did not know where he was. So the police decided to interview the young people that Michael had mentioned. It turned out that they had known about the murder plan for over a year. During this time, the couple frequently broke up and got back together after Amy decided to leave Jamie. He did not want to let her go because he could not allow her to be with someone else. Therefore, in the end, he decided to kill her. As the police questioned the young men, more disturbing details about the case emerged. Just before they broke up, Amy had told her boyfriend that she was pregnant. He was upset by the news, especially since Amy had intended to keep the baby. Jamie was furious and even gave money to friends to attack Amy, hoping she would lose the baby. He wanted to avoid the responsibility of being a father, but his friends refused to help him. One of Jamie's friends recalled Jamie shouting that Amy had never agreed to terminate the pregnancy. Jamie eventually decided to take action against her. However, after an autopsy, police discovered that Amy was not pregnant at the time of her death. The rumor of her pregnancy became one of many speculations in the case. However, this does not rule out the possibility that she may have been pregnant with Jamie's child and had terminated the pregnancy. Unfortunately, her physical condition makes it impossible to verify these claims. The police began talking to Diane, who had lived with Amy before she was murdered. It turned out that Diane was Jamie's ex-girlfriend and had gone through the same problems in her relationship with Jamie as Amy had. Diane completely empathized with Amy's experience in a toxic relationship. Diane had also faced abuse and pressure from Jamie, but she had successfully escaped the situation unscathed. Unbeknownst to her, Diane had known about Jamie's plan to kill Amy shortly before Amy moved in with her. Jamie had mentioned taking Amy for a walk in the woods where he would give her flowers, then stab her and dump her body in a pond. However, Diane found this story so unbelievable that she chose not to warn anyone about the potential danger. When the Jamie Fuller was arrested, he faced charges of first-degree murder. Jamie smiled throughout the court proceedings and even made jokes about the victim, showing no signs of regret or remorse. During his interrogation, he remained calm and attempted to shift the blame to his friends for Amy's murder. However, when other people close to the victim were questioned, it came to light that Michael had boasted about helping Jamie dispose of the body after the murder. He was subsequently arrested for being an accomplice. It was obvious that the remaining two friends could have been witnesses to the massacre but never reported it to the police. They also knew about their friend's intentions, which he had openly discussed. Nearly a year after Amy's funeral, a witness named Scott Ward gave an interview to a local newspaper. He expressed disbelief over the events and felt guilty for not sounding the alarm sooner, which might have prevented the tragedy. At that time, he was already under investigation. Other teenagers suggested that Michael was not as innocent as he appeared. They claimed he encouraged the murder of the girl and hinted that his involvement in the crime could be more significant than he admitted. Ultimately, the police determined that only Michael and Jamie were responsible for the murder, while the others were not connected to the crime and were not arrested. Public outrage grew as people needed to know the truth and find ways to protect their communities from criminals who would harm schoolgirls for no reason. Locals had good reason to believe that all 4 teenagers were involved in the tragedy. The boys' parents, however, maintained their son's innocence and denied any involvement in the crime. However, police had evidence that Jamie had openly discussed his plans throughout the day. His friends even pressured him to act on them. This behavior showed Jamie was struggling and felt compelled to prove his strength. What motivated Amy's murder? Was it jealousy, a psychotic episode, a desire to harm his child, or provocation? Although the young man was only 16 at the time of the crime, he was tried as an adult. Jamie maintained his innocence and was released on bail of $2,500, which his mother paid. His lawyers pointed out that he had consumed alcohol, and they argued that the combination with steroids could lead to uncontrollable aggression. Therefore, the defense aimed to classify the crime as non-premeditated murder due to insanity, claiming that excessive steroid use can result in psychosis and other mental health issues. The lawyers requested a psychiatric evaluation for Jamie, which involved several assessments by independent experts. All concluded that Jamie was mentally stable and fit to stand trial. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office argued that the attack was motivated by jealousy. They highlighted the manipulative behavior, strict control, and ongoing assaults that Amy had endured in the months leading up to the incident. According to Michael's confession, Jamie sought revenge because Amy attended a beach party with her friends. Another friend in the group said Jamie believed that Amy's pregnancy had to be terminated at all costs. The prosecution presented several witnesses, including Jamie's friend Ronald, who had taken carpentry classes with him. In the spring of 1991, Ronald testified in court about Amy's pregnancy. During this testimony, Jamie allegedly mentioned that the only way to get rid of the baby was to kill Amy. Dominic, who was with them that night, testified that he saw Jamie and his girlfriend go into the woods. He then heard some screaming. Dominic then noticed that Jamie had blood on her clothes and hands. Jamie even showed them the bloody knife he used in the attack. The blade was disfigured, indicating extreme violence. Dominic confirmed what Michael had said. Jamie recounted the details of the massacre he had committed. He explained that he first gagged Amy, professed his love for her, and then stabbed her in the stomach. Even then, she was still alive when he slit her throat. Amy told him that she still loved him, which made Jamie so angry that he stomped on her neck and started jumping on her head. The young witnesses claimed that Jamie was sober throughout the attack. They had only consumed alcohol after the murder. Jamie's mother had previously told police that alcohol had a negative effect on him, leading to anger and aggression. She recounted an incident where he nearly destroyed her room in a drunken fight with her. However, alcohol was not a factor in this situation. The forensic expert who testified for the prosecution explained that the stab wound was so deep that it almost went all the way through Amy's body, indicating a high level of hatred behind the murder. There were no signs of sexual violence, suggesting the attack may have been motivated by revenge or jealousy. One of the stab wounds penetrated the bone, disfiguring the knife point, and Amy had extensive bruising on her face and head injuries. Jamie, speaking to the media, claimed that he could not kill Amy because he still loved her. This claim was a lie. His televised declaration of love shocked and devastated Amy's mother, who was struggling to cope with her loss, resorting to sedatives and seeking help from a psychologist. To her, Jamie's display of love was a cruel taunt. The hearing lasted 7 days, after which the jury began deliberating its verdict. The prosecution argued that the Jamie was an extremely dangerous individual with the potential to become a serial killer and called for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The defense, in contrast, argued that the young man had lost control due to steroid abuse. The jury deliberated for 2 days, taking about 6 hours to reach a decision. Jamie was found guilty on October 23, 1992, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In a separate decision involving Jamie's friend, Michael, who had helped destroy evidence, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison after a hearing on his involvement. The victim's mother, Amy, felt this was an unfairly light sentence for his role in the crime. In 2013, new state laws were enacted that allowed minors convicted of serious offenses to apply for parole. Under these laws, each case had to be assessed individually. As a result of this legal change, Jamie, who had spent most of his adult life in prison, was given the chance for release in 2019 when he was 40 years old. Jamie's request for parole was reviewed but has been postponed indefinitely. The family of the brutal massacre victim has repeatedly appealed to law enforcement, demanding that this brutal man not be released under any circumstances. As of now, he is still incarcerated. Amy's mother struggled to cope with her daughter's death, requiring regular visits to a psychiatrist and a significant amount of medication. In 2009, her health declined rapidly, leading to her passing at the age of 57. Her family believes that her early death was directly linked to the loss of her beloved daughter. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Kathy Lamb. Kathy Lamb lived in an affluent area of Palm Beach. Kathy had a challenging childhood. Her parents divorced when she was young, and she lived with her father. During her teenage years, her mother was absent, which took a significant emotional toll on her. She was self-conscious about her weight, feeling larger than her peers. Fortunately, her stepmother was kind and supportive. Recognizing Kathy's insecurities, she helped her build her confidence, and over time, Kathy became more confident. She started playing sports and trying to lose weight. Kathy was very smart and kind, which helped her make friends in high school. She was active and cheerful, and her problems seemed to disappear when she was with her friends. One of those friends was Jeff. They met when he was 17 and she was 16, and they quickly felt a special connection. Their relationship continued even after they graduated. 2 years later, they secretly married, surprising their families. When their parents found out, they thought the couple was too young to make such a serious decision, but the couple was determined to stay together, despite family pressure. It seemed like the newlyweds had a bright future ahead of them. Jeff worked hard at a local repossessed car park, while Kathy found work as a pharmacist at a pharmacy. She had the necessary education and wanted to advance in the field. Over the years, Jeff remained a tow truck driver, while Kathy became a top pharmacist. A year later, she was offered a job as a district planner for distributing drugs to pharmacies, an opportunity she eagerly accepted. They achieved their dream of owning a home and enjoyed 12 happy years there until a devastating tragedy occurred. On June 15, 2004, Jeff returned home from work at around 7 p.m. He intended to invite his wife to dinner. However, as soon as he entered, he was horrified to see blood all over the hallway, running down the walls. The gruesome evidence of blood splatter and brain matter terrified him. As he called 911, he struggled to speak and held back tears. Initially, the operator mistook his cries for those of a woman, but Jeff eventually plucked up the courage to describe his home, which now looked like the set of a horror movie. At the end of the corridor, there was a significant amount of blood on one wall, as if it had been splattered. Facing this wall, about 1.5 meters away, similar splatters were visible on the opposite wall, and they extended down the stairs leading to the second floor. On the upper level, in the midst of the gruesome scene, lay 30-year-old Kathy, who was unresponsive. The operator attempted to guide Jeff over the phone to provide first aid, but Kathy's injuries were so severe that there was nothing that could be done. When the police arrived, they were taken aback by the horrific sight. It was one of the most brutal crime scenes they had ever encountered. Kathy's body showed multiple severe head injuries from heavy objects. Her skull and face were so badly damaged that they appeared completely disfigured. Although the murder weapon was not found at the scene, a thorough laboratory analysis determined that it was likely a long, heavy object with a hexagonal shape or similar features. Jeff mentioned that he had tried to call his wife several times after 5 p.m. but received no answer, which he found unusual. Concerned, he rushed home to meet her. It turned out that not only Kathy was injured, the couple had 3 large dogs in the house, Jeff's dog and his wife's 2 dogs. Tragically, both of his wife's pets were discovered badly beaten and lying on the floor next to their deceased owner. They had suffered severe head injuries and were barely alive. Unfortunately, the injuries were so extensive that the veterinarians had to euthanize the dogs to relieve their suffering. In a shocking turn of events, Jeff's dog was found locked in his owner's bedroom. Paws from all 3 dogs were found at the scene, along with blood that police believe did not come from the animals. They suspect the blood may have come from a struggle with the killer. The blood has been sent for analysis to determine its source and whether it can help the investigation, and they await the results. Police are uncertain whether the blood on the dogs came from Kathy or whether they fought with the attacker to protect her, resulting in their fatal injuries. Police found the dogs unharmed after the woman had been killed and the fight had begun. The amount of blood on the animals suggests that they had seriously injured the attacker, possibly lacerating an arm or leg. This means that the attacker would have bled profusely, possibly from an open wound, and that he would have sought medical attention at a hospital. The attacker's intentions remain unclear. He may have acted recklessly or out of a deep hatred for his victim, ignoring the large dogs that lived with the family. After examining the crime scene, the police still lacked any concrete leads. They had to wait for the autopsy results to gather more information. In the meantime, they checked all the local hospitals for the injured attacker. Several suspicious people came in with injuries that were found to be unrelated to the incident, as their injuries did not match those of a dog bite. The police began talking to local residents in the hope that someone had seen suspicious activity at Kathy's home or had noticed the criminal fleeing, possibly injured. Unfortunately, no one observed anything unusual. They were also trying to find a motive. Robbery seemed unlikely given the many valuables in the family's home. Only the gold earrings with diamonds that the Kathy was wearing during the attack were missing, while everything else remained untouched. Even the money, which was clearly visible, was not taken. It seems unlikely that a robber would ignore such an opportunity. There were no indications of a break-in, the furniture was undisturbed, drawers were not opened, and belongings were not scattered about, as thieves typically do when they search for valuables. This led the police to explore alternative motives and various theories. The forensic expert determined that the murder occurred between 4:30 p.m. and 5 p.m. Jeff, the first suspect who found the scene, had a strong alibi. At that time, he was on the job and was seen by numerous co-workers. Additionally, he showed no signs of injuries that would typically result from a struggle with the dogs. Just as police were about to clear Jeff of suspicion, an unknown young woman arrived at the family home. Joy Steele came to the house and introduced herself as Jeff's fiancée, which surprised the police, especially since Jeff had been crying earlier. The police found this an interesting case, as a man who had just lost his wife was being comforted by his mistress, with whom he had been in a serious relationship for a long time. This revelation made the case seem even more suspicious. 7 years into their relationship, Kathy discovered Jeff's infidelity. Despite this, they remained together and did not divorce. Kathy forgave him and even encouraged him to end the affair, leading to their reconciliation and continued life together just before the tragic incident. Police are considering whether a love triangle may have been a motive for the crime. Jeff had a strong motive for killing his troubled wife. That doesn't necessarily mean Jeff killed Kathy himself. He may have convinced someone else to do it. The police discovered a third dog locked in one of the rooms, which was unharmed. This was peculiar, especially given the serious injuries of the other two dogs belonging to the Kathy. Did the criminal truly hate her to the extent that he chose to ruin everything she cherished? The police needed to find answers to these questions. In the meantime, one of the police was questioning Jeff's mistress, Joy Steele, at the location of the incident. Joy shared her and Jeff's future plans. They planned to move away after a while Jeff planned to quit his job. Joy had a solid alibi. Joy, who was apparently working at a restaurant during the time of the murder, was present, and multiple people could confirm this. In addition, Joy had no injuries on her body. Although the suspicious couple could not have been directly involved in the murder due to their alibis and their lack of injuries, the police have not ruled them out as suspects given the serious circumstances surrounding the crime. They had a strong motive for their plan. The investigation into the crime and the hiring of the killer continues, with the police focusing on identifying potential enemies or those who may have wanted to harm Kathy. However, Kathy's friends and relatives have been unable to identify any enemies, with the exception of her husband. That same day, another suspect emerged. Jeff had another mistress named Lisa. A few weeks before the murder, Lisa's husband, Ray, discovered them together when he came home early from work and found Jeff shirtless on the couch. This confrontation led Ray to kick Jeff out of the house. The next day, Ray calls Lisa and threatens to kill Jeff if he continues with Lisa. Ray emerged as a potential suspect due to his violent nature and apparent motive. However, the situation raised questions about the Kathy. Why did Ray kill Jeff's wife? She had not harmed him and was actually the victim in the scenario, just like Ray. Despite this, Jeff continued to blame Ray. He believed that Ray had gone to the house to carry out his threat against Jeff, but Jeff was not home at the time. It is also possible that upon arriving at Jeff's house, Ray was in danger from Jeff's wife and dogs, so Ray felt compelled to kill her and the dogs. However, this motive does not fit with the extreme violence the killers showed towards Kathy. Her injuries were extremely brutal, suggesting that this was not a random crime, but an act of deep hatred. The police then turned their attention to Lisa, the second lover. Despite her husband's threats, she remained in contact with Jeff. Cell phone records confirmed that they frequently called and texted each other, including at the time of the Kathy's murder. Lisa and her husband Ray were both investigated, but they had solid alibis and were eliminated as suspects. However, the police decided to track the geolocation data of the lovers' mobile devices to gain more details. The call between Lisa and Jeff took place just minutes after the murder. Jeff's cell phone was found near his home, and Jeff was not at work at the time, contrary to what he had previously said. Additionally, Jeff's dog was unharmed, which seems more than just a coincidence. Forensic experts conducted a thorough examination of the animals. They collected DNA samples from the dog's muzzle and paws. Notably, the stains found on Jeff's dog were identified as palm prints. Blood samples taken from the scene were confirmed to belong to the Kathy, indicating that the perpetrator was in the hall with the dog after the attack on Kathy, during which she was injured or possibly killed. Police suspected that the killer's DNA might be on the animal's muzzles and paws. However, the investigation disproved this theory, revealing that the blood was not human, but believed to be from dogs that may have been fighting each other. By analyzing all the new information, police were able to piece together a clearer picture of the events that occurred on that tragic day. Someone entered the house and discovered Kathy along with her 3 large dogs. The attacker hit the woman in the head with a heavy object. 2 dogs were present, also seriously injured and later died. And they did not attack the attacker. They endured the blows without defending themselves. The 3rd dog also did not confront the attacker. Instead, the 3rd dog focused on protecting the other 2 dogs. This behavior aroused suspicion. The police consulted dog handlers for insights. Experts suggested that the dog's lack of resistance indicated they were familiar with the attacker and viewed him as a friend. This familiarity explained why they did not confront him but instead appeared to bite each other. Police found bite marks on the dogs, leading them to conclude that only Jeff, the owner of the surviving dog, could have attacked Kathy. Additionally, geolocation data indicated that the Jeff was near the house, which supported their suspicions. However, the Supreme Court only had circumstantial evidence, meaning they still had a long way to go before bringing any charges. The police needed one crucial piece of information to strengthen their case. With no further clues, the police focused on investigating Jeff's personal life to understand what might have motivated Jeff to kill his wife. It turned out that the family had recently faced significant financial difficulties, which had affected Jeff for many years before these events. Jeff's boss caught him stealing a large sum of money, about $30,000. Jeff had not spent it all and agreed to return it. He also paid his boss $20,000 in restitution. The police then analyzed Jeff's activities. It turned out that his job brought in only a small income, just enough for his family's needs. He also spent money on his mistress. His wife's income was much higher, but he did not want to tell her about his problems. Jeff was characterized as someone without any remarkable business skills. He was neither particularly foolish nor exceptionally intelligent. His earnings were limited, making the compensation amount a serious financial burden for him. Despite living in an affluent neighborhood, he struggled to come up with the funds. Jeff sought ways to earn extra money or secure a loan, but all these efforts proved fruitless, and the total amount of compensation remained far beyond his reach. He later learned that he was the sole beneficiary of Kathy's life insurance policy, which was worth $29,000. Police believed that this amount of money could solve all of Jeff's financial problems. On the day of the incident, police collected the clothes he was wearing at the time. However, forensic experts conducted a quick test and found no blood or DNA from Kathy on his clothes. The suspect was wearing dark clothing, making it difficult to detect any blood stains. The experts meticulously studied every millimeter of the items using a microscope with 60,000 times magnification. Inside the jeans, they discovered several small red drops, which the forensic team identified as blood. This blood had seeped deep into the fabric fibers, suggesting that it was from high-velocity splashes. This evidence was consistent with the nature of the injuries sustained by the Kathy. DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Kathy. The police were further surprised when they examined the Jeff's other belongings. They found a gold earring embedded with a diamond in one of his trouser pockets, which he had claimed was stolen during an attack. This indicated that he likely staged the scene and hesitated to dispose of the item to avoid being caught at a pawn shop. To strengthen their case in court, the police needed to find the murder weapon. Despite their best efforts, the police were unable to find the weapon. It took the prosecutor's office 2 months to establish a clear connection between the killer and the victim. During this time, an employee of the company where Jeff worked discovered a hexagonal crowbar on the roof of the building. The tool was standard equipment on the company's tow trucks and was available to all employees. What made the crowbar suspicious was the significant amount of blood found on it. The employee promptly notified the police of the discovery. Jeff claimed that he had lost his crowbar and was unable to provide it to the police. This raised suspicions that the bloody crowbar belonged to him and may have been hidden as the murder weapon. The crowbar was sent to a laboratory, where experts compared it to the injuries found on Kathy's head. They concluded that the shape of the tool matched the impact marks. Additionally, the blood found on the crowbar was confirmed to be Kathy's through analysis. Jeff was arrested and charged with premeditated murder. Friends knew he had often complained about his troubled marriage. He claimed that Kathy couldn't manage household chores, which made him angry. However, he overlooked that she was the one supporting the family financially and covering their travel expenses, leaving her little time for housework. Jeff's car was always cluttered with garbage, yet he continued to blame Kathy. He frequently talked to friends about wanting to end their relationship, and several acquaintances reported that he was considering divorce. Kathy was unhappy in her marriage to Jeff due to his betrayals and chaotic lifestyle, which she knew about. She often vented her frustrations to friends but couldn't bring herself to leave him because she loved him deeply. Despite her unhappiness, she stayed with Jeff, trying to tolerate his behavior. For Jeff, murder seemed like a better option than going through a divorce. He was in dire financial straits after stealing $30,000 at work, which had severely impacted his finances. If he divorced Kathy, they would have to divide their assets, and he risked losing their home. He felt he had nothing left to lose, as a divorce would leave him with little since Kathy could claim most of their assets. Jeff figured that by committing murder, he could use the life insurance payout to pay off his debts, keeping part of the money to start a new life with his mistress. Jeff had promised to make a choice between his two girlfriends, Lisa and Joy, but the decision remained a secret. During the investigation, police uncovered more details about the crime. On the day it happened, Jeff left for work but had actually planned to kill his wife. He drove a tow truck to a gas station, pretending he needed to fill it up. His absence from work was noted, and during that time, he returned home to wait for his wife to return. He was familiar with her daily routine, so he did not have to wait long. In a shocking turn of events, Jeff brutally killed his wife's dogs with a crowbar. The dogs, confused and frightened, began to fight. To stop the chaos, Jeff hit each dog on the head and then took his pet, Netarunu, into a room and locked the door. After the incident, he removed his wife's diamond earrings, intending to make it look like a robbery. He discarded some of his clothes, taking off his shirt and shoes, but he kept the jeans he wore during the massacre, likely overlooking the bloodstains on them. This oversight allowed forensic experts to find tiny drops of blood on the jeans, linking him to the crime. His lover called him while he was near his home, which revealed his location on the phone. When he arrived at the station, he attempted to dispose of the crowbar used in the attack, but did so carelessly, simply throwing it onto the roof of a utility building and not washing it. He believed the tool would never be discovered. Jeff was convicted of premeditated murder due to financial difficulties he thought he could overcome by collecting life insurance from his wife's death. Prosecutors presented substantial evidence linking him to the crime scene, the murder weapon, and the victim. His fingerprints were found on the crowbar, along with Kathy's blood on his clothing. He had attempted to stage a robbery and failed to completely conceal the earrings that were believed to have been stolen. Several people testified about domestic problems. Kathy still hoped to reconcile with her husband, despite being devastated by his betrayal. She truly loved him and was undaunted by his financial difficulties. What she craved most was love and understanding. Unfortunately, Jeff did not want to rekindle their relationship. Instead, he planned a murder that he believed would net him $29,000. It is suspected that Joy, one of Jeff's lovers, knew of his intentions. Jeff promised her a future together, on the condition that she pay off the debt he would incur from his crimes. During the hearing, the defense attempted to portray Jeff as a model husband and a good person, but no witness could reliably substantiate this claim. Jeff had never been a hard worker and showed little interest in his work. He had no motivation to do anything else and did not have a positive reputation in his family life. He was not a good husband, as he had a history of infidelity that his late wife knew about. His lifestyle was well known to friends and family. But it was his wife who suffered the most. When Jeff's efforts to build a better image failed, his attorney changed tactics. He began looking for weaknesses in the prosecution's case. However, the prosecution's strategy was well rehearsed and backed by substantial evidence, leaving little room for debate. The defense argued that Jeff was not the only possible suspect in Kathy's murder, claiming that the police had focused too quickly on him without fully exploring other potential suspects. In fact, police and the prosecutor's office had interviewed dozens of people and considered multiple suspects. Each suspect was thoroughly questioned, allowing police to eliminate those who did not fit the evidence. The prosecution argued that the attacker had two motives. First, he hoped to solve his financial problems through a life insurance policy. Second, he wanted to get rid of his troubled wife so he could live with one of his mistresses. Additionally, he sought to avoid the risk of losing his assets or having to divide his assets in a divorce. The prosecution also argued that Jeff's mistress, Lisa, knew about his plans. She supported him and was waiting for the call to hear about the progress of the crime. Her indiscretion led her to call Jeff, which provided the police with a vital clue. Investigations were conducted to determine whether the mistresses were involved in planning or organizing the crime, but the results were negative. However, it is clear that they supported the Jeff, even though they should have reported his bad intentions to the police to prevent the murder. Ultimately, no evidence was found to prove the lovers' guilt or involvement, so they faced no consequences in court. In September 2006, Jeff Lamb was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life without parole. As the verdict was read, Lisa wept uncontrollably in court. Kathy's family believes the court's ruling was fair. In Kathy's mother's opinion, Jeff should rot behind bars for the rest of his life. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Julia Niswinder. Julia Niswinder was born in 1989 in the small town of Monroe, which has a population of 20,000. She has a twin sister named Jennifer. The girls were raised by their grandparents while their mother was building her personal life. Kim had given birth to them at 15, claiming she was raped at 14 by a guy she barely knew. However, relatives say he was someone familiar and close to the family. Regardless, he avoided taking responsibility. After discovering her pregnancy, Kim decided she wasn't ready to be a mother and entrusted her daughters to her parents. The grandparents became their official guardians and raised them as their own children. When the children grew up, their mother remarried Jim, who worked in the cleaning business, and they had another daughter. By then, Jennifer was already attending school and living with her mother. While Julia spent a lot of time with her grandparents on her mother's side. In high school, things changed. According to her mother, Julia became defiant and uncontrollable, often arguing with her twin sister, Jennifer. Eventually, their mother grew tired of the constant fights between the daughters. Their house was small, with only 2 bedrooms and a living room, so she couldn't give the older daughters separate rooms. As a result, she decided to send Julia to live with her grandparents again. Julia was happy to return to grandparents. She lived there for a while, and her grandparents indulged her and were very affectionate toward her. At that time, Julia became very concerned about her appearance and tried to lose weight. She followed strict diets, restricted herself in almost everything, and ate very little. Her grandma was worried about her, but Julia assured her that she was fine. At 19 years old, Julia needed to make her own life decisions. She enrolled at Eastern Michigan University in the journalism faculty and continued living with her grandmother. Julia dreamed of becoming a TV presenter. She became close to Jennifer and her mother but did not want to return home. The 2 sisters became closer, sharing secrets, experiences and events in their lives. Julia later moved to a room on the campus of a university in the small town of Salanta, Michigan. She was fortunate to get a room with a bathroom. Julia also got a job with her mother at Walmart. Her new place was a 45-minute drive from her mother's house. Her neighbors were girls she got along with well. On Thursday, December 6, 2012, with Christmas and the holidays approaching, Julia's neighbors left for the weekend to visit their families. Julia visited her mother's family. They had already set up a Christmas tree and began decorating it and the house together. They all enjoyed hot chocolate and listened to Christmas songs, creating a festive atmosphere and having a wonderful time together. On Friday, December 7th, she visited her mother's workplace and they went shopping for presents together. Julia and her mother then went home together, and an argument broke out that turned into a fight. The exact details of the incident remain unclear. Julia left the house in distress, drove to her grandmother's house, and expressed that she never wanted to return to that house again. Her grandmother comforted her, invited her to stay, and together they decorated the Christmas tree and the house. Julia's mother later visited her grandparents and reassured Julia that she had misunderstood the situation. Julia's grandmother listened to both sides and sensed that something was wrong. When her mother left, Julia stayed with her grandmother. The next day, December 8th, Julia went to work. She saw her mother there but did not speak to her. As they passed each other, Julia's mother told her that she loved her. After her shift, Julia went home. During her lunch break, she met her sister Jennifer at a coffee shop and mentioned her plans for the evening, saying that she was going to meet a guy after work. But she kept the details a secret. Julia was very private about her personal life, so it was not surprising that Julia kept the information secret with Jennifer. After meeting with Jennifer, she rushed to the car without putting on her coat, despite the cold weather. The last time Jennifer spoke to Julia was around 11 p.m. when Julia returned home from her date. Their conversation was brief. Julia simply said, "I'm home," before hanging up. Julia was very tired and she needed to study for an exam the next day, December 9th. After working at Walmart, she went shopping and then returned home. That night, she ran into a neighbor returned from visiting her family. The neighbor was getting ready to sleep at her boyfriend's house. Julia closed the bedroom door and was about to go to sleep. While the neighbor was getting ready, she heard the TV playing loudly in Julia's room. This made her feel strange because she had never seen Julia watching TV before, especially when it was time to go to bed. However, the neighbor was in a hurry to meet her boyfriend, so she didn't investigate further and left the house. On Monday morning, December 10, 2012, a neighbor returned from a family visit. She quickly showered to go to school. While getting ready, she noticed that Julia's alarm clock kept ringing, but no one seemed to have turned it off. Knowing that Julia often struggled to wake up in the morning, the neighbor was not surprised. She knocked on Julia's door to try to wake her up, but received no response. After a while, she decided not to bother her anymore and went to school. That day, Julia did not go to class and also missed an important exam, which was unusual for her, as she had never been absent or late for an exam before. Julia missed her shift at her stepfather's cleaning company, where she had taken a part-time job to earn money before the holidays. Although she was scheduled to work, she did not show up. She also missed her shift at Walmart that evening, which raised concerns among her coworkers. The next day, December 11th, Julia missed her shift for the second time. Her coworkers grew increasingly concerned and tried to reach her by phone, but no one answered. An employee had Julia's mother's phone number and called her that evening to inform her that Julia had missed 2 shifts. Julia's mother, Kim, was at a cafe playing darts with Jennifer and other relatives at the time. She noted that their schedules often didn't align, and it was common for them to go 2 or 3 days without seeing or calling each other. When Kim learned that Julia was missing and not responding to calls, she panicked and tried to reach her daughter repeatedly, but all her calls went to voicemail. Concerned, Kim called Julia's friend Rachel and asked her to check on Julia. Rachel agreed and went to Julia's house around 9 p.m. Rachel found Julia's car parked in the driveway next to the house, but no one answered the door or the phone. Concerned, Rachel sought out a security guard for assistance. She asked the guard to open Julia's room to check, but he refused and instead called the police. The guard could not find a spare key to Julia's room. When the police arrived, they broke down the door and entered the apartment. Inside the bedroom, everything was in disarray, furniture was scattered on the floor. And Julia's handbag was on the bed, making it look like a robbery had taken place. As the police continued their search of the apartment, they made a dreadful discovery. They found the body of the Julia face down in the bathtub. Her body was fully submerged, and her hands were behind her back with her feet together. There were signs of restraint on her wrists and ankles. A phone was also found underwater beneath her body. Julia's torn clothes were on the bathroom floor, and it was evident that the fabric had been cut with a knife. After examining her, the police concluded that her body had likely been in the water for 2 days and was in a state of advanced decomposition. The knife and rope used to tie up Julia were not found anywhere in the apartment. All of Julia's valuables, including her wallet with cash, laptop, and car keys, were still on the table, and the wrapped Christmas presents were untouched. The only items missing were the pillowcase and the keys to Julia's room, which led investigators to rule out the possibility of a robbery. Rachel learned the tragic news from the police and immediately informed Julia's mother about her daughter's death. Kim and Jennifer quickly got into their car and drove to Julia's apartment. Despite the police cordon, the mother and sister approached the building to find out what had happened. They tried to enter the room but were stopped by the police. The family demanded answers about Julia, but no one would give them any information. They were distraught and pressed the police for information, but the police only confirmed that Julia was dead. Police took Julia's family to the station along with her neighbors for questioning. Julia's neighbors said they generally got along with her, although they had had a conflict in the past. They had resolved their differences and had not had any problems since. The neighbors said they were not home when the murder occurred and provided a confirmed alibi, clearing them of any suspicion. Forensic experts examined the crime scene and found no signs of forced entry. All windows and doors were locked. Julia's room was on the first floor, leading police to speculate that she may have opened the door herself and that the attacker was likely someone she knew. At the crime scene, police discovered bloody rubber gloves, male biological fluids, and 3 DNA samples on the gloves. The evidence was analyzed, revealing that 1 DNA sample belonged to Julia, while the other 2 came from an unidentified male. One of the samples was too decomposed to be identifiable, and there was no record of the second male DNA sample in the police database. Notably, the biological fluids belonged to a man who had had a vasectomy, suggesting that he was not a father. This led police to conclude that the suspect was likely an older man rather than a younger one, as vasectomies are not typically performed at a young age. As a result, police focused their search on adult men who knew Julia. An autopsy revealed that Julia died from strangulation. She had been strangled before being thrown into the water. The potential suspect had turned up the volume on the television on the day of the crime to drown out any screams she may have made during the struggle. A toxicology report confirmed that there were no traces of alcohol or illegal drugs in her system. While the police continued their investigation, Julia's family decided to conduct their own investigation to find out the truth. They posted leaflets and appealed to the public for help through the media and social networks. But these efforts did not help their investigation. Police discovered that the girl had been dating a young man shortly before the murder. Police checked Julia's phone and identified the man, taking him in for questioning. However, he was soon released, as he had a solid alibi that cleared him of suspicion. Police found Julia's stepfather, Jim, suspicious, as he appeared unusually calm and did not seem to be grieving over Julia's death. He was familiar with her house and could have easily gained access to the apartment, as Julia may have let him in herself. People who knew him described him as strange, reclusive, and unsociable. Everyone kept their distance from Jim, especially after Jim had a vasectomy following the birth of his daughter with Kim. This made him the primary suspect in the investigation. When Julia's mother, Kim, and her sister Jennifer found out about the suspicions surrounding Jim, they strongly defended him, believing he was innocent. Kim argued that she had trouble sleeping at night and frequently got up to use the bathroom due to health issues. She insisted that she would have noticed if Jim had left the bed that night, but he stayed with her the entire time. Kim rejected all allegations against Jim, explaining that she had previously been a victim of violence. She stated that if she had sensed any danger from Jim, she would never have allowed him near her daughters. Julia's grandparents were very concerned about her and decided to speak up. They informed the police about a fight that occurred at Julia's parents' house a few days before the tragedy. Although Julia didn't provide details about the conflict, she did say she would never return to that house. This raised questions about whether she had discovered something troubling or if there was another reason that led Jim to want to eliminate her. The grandparents noted that Kim and Jim's marriage was on the brink of divorce, as they frequently argued, and Kim had expressed that Jim might leave her. They hadn't shared a bedroom for a long time, making it difficult for Kim to know if Jim was home that night. This could explain Kim's intense protectiveness of her husband. She might have been trying to save their marriage or covering for him. In the early days after the incident, the police prevented Julia's mother and stepfather from entering her room where the crime took place, as they were collecting evidence and information. Despite this, Kim and Jim attempted to gain access to the room and were eventually successful, although Kim later said she did not remember how they got in. The police were surprised because they had not been granted permission to enter the room. Once inside, her parents immediately began unpacking and cleaning the room. First, they dumped a large bag of trash in the bathroom. After the cleanup, much of the original crime scene became untraceable. Additionally, Julia's car, which she had saved up to buy and was still paying for, was quickly sold by her parents, on the grounds that they could no longer afford the loan. This raised significant suspicions. The FBI eventually got involved. Forensic experts concluded that Jim was the prime suspect. Julia's maternal grandfather, James, noticed that Jim had a very strict parenting style, often making her cry and cornering her. James suspected that Jim might be punishing his daughter harshly behind closed doors. It was also revealed that Jim had been a karate instructor and the children had reported their mother for his brutal treatment. Jim had trained his daughter rigorously, helping her achieve a black belt in karate. The police asked Jim to provide a DNA sample, which he readily provided to clear his name. However, his DNA did not match that of the second man found on the glove. As time passed, the investigation stalled, and the case seemed to have been forgotten by everyone except the grandparents. They regularly asked the police for any updates and expressed their frustration at the lack of progress. Julia's grandparents still believed that the police should thoroughly investigate Jim, her stepfather. James suspected that Jim may have taken latex gloves from a cleaner at work to frame someone else while concealing his own involvement. However, this theory was never pursued further. It left many unanswered questions, such as whose DNA was on the damaged glove. It raised the possibility that there could have been two criminals involved. They asked Jim to take a lie detector test, which he passed twice, but Julia's grandfather remained skeptical. He still believed that Jim was somehow involved in Julia's murder. James' persistent attempts to communicate with the police about the investigation led them to stop contacting him. This decision upset only Julia's mother. Living in Florida, James was unable to visit the police in person, which resulted in him losing access to important information and feeling powerless. His daughter Kim and granddaughters, Jennifer and Madison, wrote to James to say he was no longer part of their family, which hurt him deeply. One of Julia's friends informed the police that Julia had reported harassment from her stepfather, who referred to Julia as his girlfriend, causing her fear. This suggested a possible sexual motive for the murder, prompting the police to seek a search warrant for Jim's home. During the search of his laptop, they discovered numerous explicit photos of minors. Jim was arrested due to these photos. At first, he claimed he was innocent, insisting that he did not know where the photos came from and that he was being framed. Later, he conceded that the photos might belong to him but insisted he was unaware that the subjects were minors. He maintained his innocence and was found not guilty because the prosecution failed to prove that the photos showed minors. Later, Julia's friend withdrew her accusations against her stepfather, although police informed her that her previous statements had been recorded. James discovered that Kim and Jennifer spoke to this friend and likely pressured her to change her testimony. Despite everything, Kim continues to support her husband and believes in his innocence. She thinks that her neighbor is responsible for her daughter's death due to a disagreement. However, this theory is not taken seriously because the neighbor has an alibi, and only male DNA was found at the crime scene. 3 years after Julia's murder, in 2015, Kim and Jim's attorney advised them not to give a written statement because it could be used against them in court. James was even more angry when he heard this. He felt that if they had nothing to hide, they would not have hired an attorney or refused to give a written statement, because giving false testimony could have legal consequences. By insisting on giving a statement, they avoided potential liability. It was later discovered that the police had overlooked a crucial piece of evidence. It was the bathtub rug that might contain the criminal's DNA. This information emerged when new police took over the case. They reviewed all the documents and paid special attention to this rug. However, the police could not find it. Julia's mother allowed them to search among Julia's belongings, which she had taken from Julia's room and stored in a storage room, but the rug was not among them. Its disappearance is a mystery. Only Julia's family had access to the storage facility. Julia's grandfather suspected that her mother and stepfather had thrown the rug away while cleaning the bathroom, along with the trash. The stepfather's mother and Julia's twin sister both insist that there was no argument in their home a few days before Julia's murder. They described the gathering as warm and friendly, with no disagreements. The James is determined to seek justice for Julia. He has thoroughly researched DNA and discovered that technology has made significant advancements in the past decade, allowing for the analysis of damaged or weak DNA samples. He is puzzled by the police's disregard for his requests and suggestions, as they appear reluctant to pursue the case. Julia's mother, Kim, has divorced Jim, but they remain on good terms and maintain communication. She continues to support Jim's innocence and views him as the decent person. As a result, there have been no arrests in the case, and the perpetrator remains unpunished. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Matthew Eapen. Sunil and Deborah got married in 1990 after meeting in medical college. Sunil, from Chicago, USA, followed his father's path and became an anesthesiologist, while Deborah worked as an ophthalmologist. Their first child, Brendan, was born in 1994, and their second child, Matthew, born May 24, 1996. They are young parents working in the medical field. They face significant challenges balancing their careers and family life. Both came from respected families with successful backgrounds in education and medicine, motivating them to achieve similar success. They lived in a prestigious area of Boston, Massachusetts, in a lovely home and were financially comfortable enough to hire a nanny. The nanny became like a family member, handling both childcare and household duties, and lived on their property. Deborah soon returned to work part-time, having completed advanced training courses during her pregnancy. Balancing her professional responsibilities with family care was difficult and stressful. The high workload placed on the nannies often led to them leaving due to stress or being dismissed if they couldn't meet the family's expectations. Before hiring 18-year-old Louise Woodward from Cheshire, Great Britain, they used to employ 3 other nannies. Louise lived with her family until she turned 18, then decided to take a gap year in the United States before continuing her education. Although she didn't have formal training, she loved children and got along well with them. She registered as a nanny and housekeeper with a recruiting agency, which helped her move to Boston and find a job. In December 1996, she started working for the Sunil family, whose youngest child, Matthew, was only 8 months old. She had no prior experience with infants, including changing diapers, and had only 3 days of training before she began her job. Louise was given the responsibility of caring for Matthew and 2 years old, Brendan, and assisting with household chores. She quickly found the workload overwhelming due to the family's busy daily routine. All this workload went against Louise's plans, as she had come to the USA seeking adventure and enjoyment, not to work without any days off. She initially thought that being a nanny would provide her with a livelihood without much responsibility. However, looking after children aged 8 months and 2 years truly requires experience, training, and a sense of responsibility. It is challenging to expect an 18-year-old to have such expertise without proper training. Despite this, Sunil and Deborah, who were desperate for help, accepted Louise since they needed a nanny housekeeper. Furthermore, her services were affordable. However, Louise's behavior did not meet the family's high standards, so they gave her a list of rules to follow. As a young nanny, she had little choice because previous failures with other families had put her at risk of being dismissed by the agency. She needed to keep her job to maintain her income. It was challenging for her to suppress her youthful, free spirit, as she preferred to walk, chat with friends, and attend parties rather than focus on work. Occasionally, she would wander around Boston and indulge in her dreams. However, she started refusing work more often, frequently asking for time off, and spending a lot of time on herself. She began taking daily walks, returning late in the evening, regularly attending parties, and struggling to wake up in the morning, often sleeping until nearly lunchtime. This behavior disappointed the Epens, as she would spend hours chatting with her family in the UK, neglecting her responsibilities with the children. One day, Deborah came home from work earlier than usual and found the children sleeping at home alone without any supervision. Later, the nanny Louise returned from a party. There were suspicions that similar incidents had occurred before. Naturally, Sunil and Deborah felt worried about their children and they were not happy with her. They spoke to her and imposed a curfew, but it didn't solve the problem. They were very unhappy with her behavior and felt they weren't getting their money's worth for services. Although they still wanted to trust her, they saw her as lazy and irresponsible. So, the relationship which she began to significantly deteriorate a few days before the unfortunate incident. She openly told Sunil that she didn't enjoy being a nanny and didn't want children because it was difficult, yet she pleaded not to be fired because she desperately needed the job. Sunil made more rules to discipline her, to get the nanny at the level they desired. On February 3, 1997, Deborah informed Louise that she could leave if anything was not to her liking. However, Louise, the nanny, resisted the idea, insisting there was no need to rush and that she was willing to accept and adhere to their new, stricter conditions. They agreed but mentioned they needed to change the children's sleep schedule by limiting sleep after 3 p.m. to prevent disrupting their nighttime rest. This change was not aimed at Louise personally but was necessary to reorganize the children's daily routine. Shortly after this, a terrible tragedy occurred. The tragedy happened just 10 weeks after Louise began her job. On February 4, 1997, Louise woke the children up in the morning after the parents left for work. She mentioned that Matthew was unusually fussy and cried a lot from the start of the day. Louise bathed him and then put him back to bed to calm him down. At 3:15 p.m., she went to wake him up from his nap and noticed he was breathing weakly and irregularly. She took him to the living room to perform CPR, but he remained unconscious. Initially, she couldn't reach Sunil and Deborah and only called 911 at 3:45 p.m. to report that Matthew, the 8-month-old, was not breathing. Louise informed the coordinator that the baby might have choked on vomit because his face was turning blue. Emergency services arrived quickly. The child was alive but in critical condition. The doctors rushed him to the children's hospital, where they found that Matthew had much more severe injuries than initially reported. Matthew, an 8-month-old baby, was found to have a 10-centimeter crack at the base of his skull, bleeding in his eyes, a hematoma between the skull and brain, and bleeding in his neck and back of the brain. He also had a broken wrist, and vomit was found in his trachea. He was urgently taken to the operating room for brain surgery and connected him to a life support machine because he was in a coma. Experienced doctors suggested that these injuries were caused by being violently shaken and hit on the head. In pediatrics, this is known as shaken baby syndrome. Babies are born with disproportionately large heads and weak neck muscles, making them vulnerable to injury when shaken. The unfixed head will dangle when shaken, causing damage to brain cell membranes and brain injury. When a baby is shaken, the brain moves back and forth inside the skull, leading to swelling and bleeding. Adults often shake babies out of frustration when they cry, not realizing it won't calm them down but will make them cry more. Continued shaking can cause severe injuries or even be fatal. Most cases occur in children up to 2 years old, but even a 4-year-old can suffer greatly from such shaking. Around 4 p.m., Deborah, Matthew's mother, noticed she had missed a call from Louise at 3:15 p.m. and also saw an urgent text message from she. Concerned, she left her patient at the hospital and called she, who explained the situation. Deborah was furious. She asked for leave from work and rushed to the hospital where Matthew was admitted. On the way, she prayed that her son would be okay. Upon arrival, she informed the doctors of her medical expertise, as she was an ophthalmologist, and asked to examine her baby. She quickly discovered severe Matthew's eye hemorrhaging. Meanwhile, the doctors alerted the police about the baby's serious injuries, prompting law enforcement to visit the Eapen family home to question the nanny. Louise was at home, looking upset and concerned, with Brendan. She explained that Matthew had been irritable and difficult since the morning, and despite her efforts to calm him, nothing worked. By the end of the conversation, she confessed to possibly being a bit harsh with him. Overwhelmed by his continuous crying and screaming, she shook him to try to soothe him, but it was ineffective. In frustration, she threw him onto a pile of towels on the bed. While taking him to the bathroom, she accidentally dropped him, which caused him to hit his head on the floor. Her account was alarming, given the severity of Matthew's injuries. The following day, the police arrested Louise on charges of assaulting a child. Matthew's condition was not improving, and doctors were sure he had no hope of recovery. The brain injury was so severe that, even if he survived, he would be paralyzed for life. Sunil and Deborah, who were also medically educated, understood this. On February 9, 1997, they made the difficult decision to disconnect Matthew from life support, worsening Louise's situation as she was accused of murder. She was denied bail before the trial, but continued to insist on her innocence, maintaining it was a tragic accident. Before the trial on May 7, 1997, Louise agreed to take a polygraph test. During the test, she was asked if she had caused physical harm to Matthew on that day. She denied causing any injury, and a lie detector expert concluded her answers were truthful with 95% confidence. Another expert, hired by her lawyers, also confirmed that she answered all questions truthfully. On October 7, 1997, a trial began in Cambridge, Massachusetts, involving many medical experts, including neurosurgeons, pediatricians, ophthalmologists, and pathologists, all of whom were familiar with similar crimes. In the courtroom, there was extensive discussion about Matthew's injuries and Louise's behavior. Most experts believed that his injuries were caused by abuse and violence. Many doubted Louise's statement that she had accidentally hit the boy's head, noting that the injuries showed signs of blunt force trauma. The child had probably been severely and brutally beaten, and the injuries appeared fresh. An expert for the prosecution initially compared Matthew's injury to those from a fall from the second floor, but this statement was later withdrawn. The defense argued that Matthew's head and wrist injuries occurred weeks prior to the incident, before the nanny was in their home. The lawyer suggested that the child's parents, Sunil and Deborah, could have been involved in neglect or abuse. In court, Louise stated that she had not noticed any injuries to Matthew's head or arm. She explained that her interaction with the child was mild, but it caused the reopening of an old injury, leading to bleeding. She mentioned that the day before the tragic incident, the child fell near the stairs and hurt himself, which might have aggravated the injury. Louise clarified that her use of British English was misunderstood. When she said popped, she meant she placed the child on the bed, not threw him, as might be interpreted in American English, and she denied dropping the baby in the bathtub. The defense argued that if the prosecution's claim of cruel treatment were true, Matthew would have had serious bruises and hematomas on the head and body, which were not present. This suggests that the child might have been shaken to calm him down, but not to the extent the prosecution claimed. Louise, in an emotional outburst, lost control and shook the child, causing old injuries to resurface. Witnesses and experts testified that there was no fresh bleeding in the brain, indicating that the skull fracture was an older injury. However, Sunil and Deborah denied that Matthew had suffered such a traumatic brain injury. The defense suggested that these actions might have been driven by fear, as Louise panicked while trying to revive the child. Unfortunately, Brendan could not testify at the trial because he was too young to understand what had happened. During the trial, Louise acted inappropriately. She occasionally smirked and laughed, which was attributed to nervous shock. At the time, she was reportedly only 18 years old, and the incident described triggered such a reaction. Additionally, she retracted her initial testimony obtained by detectives during the first interview. She did not mention how challenging it was to work for the Eapen family, who overwhelmed her with childcare and household duties, for which she was unprepared. She had come to the United States to relax and have fun. Despite this, she insisted that she never mistreated the children. She claimed she would never harm a child, especially to the extent of causing serious injuries that led to a coma and could paralyze an 8-month-old baby. Louise's relatives from the UK spoke at the trial, praising her as a gentle and reserved person. They described her as an obedient parishioner of a local church, a vegetarian, and a clarinet player. However, her friends from the US had a different view, seeing her as a party girl who never missed a chance to go out. 3 of her friends testified at the trial, as well as former employers who had let her go due to incompetence and irresponsibility. The prosecution highlighted that she tried to wake Matthew 15 to 20 times but found the boy wasn't breathing. She attempted to help him and called his parents, but they didn't answer. It took her half an hour to finally call 911. The prosecutor questioned why she delayed calling for emergency help when immediate action was needed. She explained that she was panicking and stressed, trying hard to manage the situation on her own. Throughout the trial, Louise showed little emotion. She occasionally smiled but never expressed regret for what happened. She spoke fondly of Brendan and Matthew, she describing Brendan as smart and talkative, and Matthew as a sweet, smiling, and playful child. The trial was broadcast live on British television, capturing the attention of almost the entire country, with many people supporting she. On October 30, 1997, a jury found Louise Woodward guilty of second-degree murder. She begged the judge to lighten her sentence. She begged them not to let her spend the rest of her life in prison for something she didn't do. However, the judge ignored her pleas. Louise was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Upon hearing the sentence, she burst into tears, unable to believe what was happening. She questioned the judge, insisting that she hadn't done anything wrong and sincerely hoped for an acquittal. Her mother supported her, stating in court that a terrible judicial error had occurred. She argued that her daughter could not have harmed a defenseless child and that she was innocent and did not deserve such a harsh punishment. In fact, the jury's opinions were mixed. Many people believe that Louise is innocent in Matthew's death, attributing it to an old injury. However, after further deliberation, the jury concluded she was guilty. It later emerged that those who initially supported acquittal were persuaded to vote guilty. This thing sparked significant public outcry in both the United States and Louise's home country, Britain. Many people in the UK donated funds to assist Louise and her family, totaling about $500,000. Additionally, there were mass protests from supporters who believed Louise was an innocent victim of the US legal system. This public pressure led to the conviction being overturned by the judge 10 days later. By then, Louise had already spent about 8 months in prison. After reviewing the case materials, the new judge concluded that Louise's actions were due to her inexperience and immaturity, not malicious intent, and that murder was not her purpose. Louise was sentenced to the time she had already spent in prison awaiting trial, which was 289 days, allowing her to be immediately released. Her supporters celebrated her release like a holiday. Meanwhile, the death of Matthew, the 8-month-old child, was largely overlooked. Even if his death wasn't her fault, his parents sought justice for their child, and the prosecutor was determined to see Louise imprisoned for a longer period. He noted that he had recently been involved in a trial where a father was accused of killing a child in a similar case, and that father remained in prison. He questioned why Louise, a nanny, was released, viewing it as unfair and contradictory given the prevalence of similar cases in U.S. judicial practice. Louise was released from prison after serving less time than it took. She returned to her hometown in the UK in 1998 and enrolled in the Faculty of Law at London South Bank University. She explained that her interest in law developed during the trial, as she engaged deeply with legal matters to better understand the proceedings. Thus, choosing law as a profession felt natural and obvious to her. While pursuing her studies, Louise decided to fulfill another dream, learning to dance. She took salsa lessons and later opened her own dance school, becoming a dance instructor. Her classes included children, often accompanied by their mothers, who were comfortable with her past and aware of the accusations against her. In 2002, Louise graduated with honors from university and began working as a lawyer. However, a year later, she left her law firm to return to her dance studio. She then married businessman Anthony Elkis, who worked in cargo transportation, and they had a daughter. By 2014, Louise had authored several books and participated in numerous interviews about past incident. In all interviews, she has insisted that she was wrongly accused of Matthew's death. She insisted she had no intention to harm and believed her arrest was unjust. She remarked that the U.S. judicial system often demands accountability, suggesting that if the parents weren't blamed, the suspicion fell on her. Still, she expressed relief and gratitude that the judicial system ultimately resolved the case, leading to her release. Louise, now 45 years old, continues to live a normal life without feeling guilty about the past, and many people support her in this. In one of her interviews, she stated that she have the right to enjoy her life. Meanwhile, the parents of Matthew, Deborah, and Sunil faced public outrage. People criticized them for prioritizing their careers over spending time with their children, questioning why they hired an inexperienced young nanny who was not equipped to care for small children. Despite knowing this, they were attracted because the cost of hiring her would be very low and burdened her with excessive responsibilities. The 18-year-old nanny, Louise, received only 3 days of training before being overwhelmed with numerous restrictions and rules. Due to public pressure, the Eapen family had to relocate to a new, undisclosed address. It is known that they now have 2 more children and no longer hire nannies, with Deborah taking on the responsibility of raising the children herself. They established the Matthew Eapen Foundation at Boston Children's Hospital to enhance child safety and well-being by educating the public about the dangers of shaking a baby and providing support to victims and their families. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Mallory Beach. Mallory Beach was born on April 18, 1999, in Walterboro, South Carolina, USA. She had 2 older sisters, Morgan and Savannah. At 19, Mallory graduated from Hampton High School and then attended the University of South Carolina. She worked at clothing boutiques in Fort and dreamed of becoming an interior designer. She loved animals. She had dogs and volunteered at an animal shelter. She was a bright and beautiful girl who was sweet, kind, and sociable, with many friends. She was dating Anthony Cook. They were friends with 20-year-old Paul Murdaugh, who came from a wealthy and influential family. On February 23, 2019, the group planned to attend a party at a house owned by the mayor's family. They decided to travel there using the Murdaugh's 5-meter sea hunt boat. The group included Mallory, her boyfriend Anthony, Anthony's cousin Connor, Connor's girlfriend Miley Altman, Paul, and Paul's girlfriend Morgan. All were under 21, but that didn't stop them from obtaining alcohol and drinking on the boat. Although they could have reached by car, they chose to go by boat to drink beer and other alcoholic drinks en route without encountering the police. Paul was driving the boat and had already been drinking. He used his older brother Buster's ID to buy alcohol at the store, which he was quite proud of. After arriving, they enjoyed drinking and eating oysters. The party went well, and 5 hours later, they headed back home. Paul, now quite drunk, was still steering the boat. He stopped at a bar along the shore to buy more alcohol and drank there with Connor, while their other friends waited outside, eager to get home. At around 2 a.m., Paul and Connor left the bar. Everyone boarded the boat to head home. Under the influence of alcohol, Paul's behavior worsened, and he became aggressive. For half the night, Paul was in his underwear, saying he was hot, despite the cold February weather. His friends even suspected he might have taken illegal substances earlier, as he occasionally did so. Anthony, who was much more sober than Paul, wanted to take control of the boat, but Paul refused, insisting it was his boat. The other friends tried to convince he to let Anthony steer, but which nearly led to a fight on board. Anthony asked he to drop them off at the nearest pier, but he refused and mockingly suggested they call an Uber, knowing they were on a river with no access to cars. His behavior was inappropriate, and his friends argued with him. Paul repeatedly walked away, leaving the wheel unattended. He shouted at his girlfriend, Morgan, then hit her, spat on her, and pushed her so hard that she fell. Mallory and Anthony were upset by this and stayed at the stern of the boat. After seeing he hit and push Morgan, Mallory yelled at him to stop and calm down. However, he ignored her, angrily glaring before returning to the steering wheel. In anger at Mallory, he accelerated the boat. It sped up so much that the friends were thrown about. Anthony and Mallory clung to each other. but they couldn't hold on for long. At 2:20 a.m., the boat crashed into a bridge, causing the friends to fall into the water. When Anthony surfaced, he was quickly swept to the other side of the river by a strong current, but Mallory wasn't with him. Everyone except Mallory managed to swim to the shore. She was nowhere to be found, despite their calls and searches. Anthony returned to his friends and searched the water for she, but he couldn't find her. The boat had no lights, and although they used flashlights, the darkness made it difficult to see. Meanwhile, Paul lay in the mud under the bridge, unable to get up. It was cold outside, and the water was freezing in February. Connor called 911 at 2:26 a.m. Anthony continued searching for Mallory in the water, while Miley stayed on the shore. Morgan, Paul's girlfriend, had hit her head severely and was bleeding. After the call, Connor and Miley climb up the bridge to see if they can see Mallory from up there, but they still didn't see her. Paul went on the boat to be with Morgan. The police and ambulance arrived promptly to aid Morgan, and the search for Mallory commenced. Meanwhile, Paul remained on the boat in his boxers, speaking on the phone and gesturing. When Paul finally left the boat, he was smiling and behaving as if nothing had happened. He did not join the search for Mallory, which angered Anthony so much that he nearly attacked Paul, but the police stepped in to prevent it. The Coast Guard informed all ships to search for Mallory in the water. Meanwhile, Paul, Connor, Miley, and Morgan were taken to the hospital for treatment. Anthony stayed back to search for Mallory, despite he being soaked and very cold. At the hospital, the police came to question everyone, but Paul's father, Alex, and grandfather intervened. The Murdaughs, Paul's family, were wealthy and influential. Since 1920, they had held the position of chief prosecutor in the district. They also had their own law firm and were prominent in private practice across the district. They used their influence to pressure the police and hinder the investigation. Night searches for Mallory failed, and the next day, a large-scale search involving divers and helicopters began. Anthony did not go to the hospital and instead continued looking for she at the river. He spent days helping rescuers search for her. Volunteers eventually found her body on March 3rd, about 5 miles from the boat wreck site. An autopsy revealed that she died due to drowning and head trauma from a blunt object. She had hit her head, lost consciousness, drowned, and the strong current carried her away from the accident site. About 500 people attended her funeral. It was clear that Paul's irresponsible behavior and drunken boat driving caused this tragedy. However, the influential Murdaugh family went to great lengths to keep Paul out of prison. The police stated that it was unclear who was steering and who accelerated the boat. Paul denied being responsible, though he couldn't recall who it was. However, everyone else on the boat claimed it was Paul. The police argued that the friends' statements were unreliable because they might have been intoxicated. Paul's blood alcohol content was 3 times the legal limit. Investigators found beer and other alcoholic drinks in the boat's refrigerator. CCTV footage showed Paul buying alcohol at a local store, appearing pleased after the purchase. Moments later, he was seen crawling around the boat's refrigerator with beer. The boat's GPS indicated that the friends stopped at the pier around 12:45 a.m. Surveillance videos captured Paul and Connor at a bar, and later, the footage showed all the friends returning to the boat. Mallory family was frustrated with the inadequate investigation of the case, and the perpetrator will likely go unpunished. They initially filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the store and the individual who sold alcohol to Paul, but it was dismissed. Subsequently, they sued Buster had allowed Paul to use his ID to buy alcohol. This lawsuit was filed on April 18, 2019, which would have been Mallory's 20th birthday. Paul faced 3 felony charges: boating under the influence causing the death of Mallory and injuring 2 others, Connor and Miley. He pleaded not guilty to all charges and was released on a $50,000 bail awaiting trial. His bail conditions allowed him to travel, consume alcohol, and operate a boat. At his court appearance, Paul, dressed in a plaid shirt, sat in the hallway on the phone, never handcuffed or in a prison uniform, and had never been jailed. While the trials are about to take place, a tragic incident occurred. On June 7, 2021, Paul and his mother, Maggie, were found shot to death at their home near the dog kennels. Alex discovered them at 10 p.m. when he returned. Paul was shot in the chest and head with a shotgun, while Maggie was shot in the head with a rifle. Only shell casings were found at the scene, suggesting two different weapons had been used, leading police to suspect two perpetrators. The shootings occurred between 9 and 9:30 p.m., shortly before Alex arrived. Paul's phone was found in an unusual position, as if tampered with, and Maggie's phone was missing. It was later located outside the residence using the Find iPhone feature. Fingerprints and DNA from the killer were collected from it. The Beach family sent a letter of condolence to the Murdaugh family. They extends their deepest and warmest sympathies to the Murdaugh family during this terrible time. Having suffered the devastating loss of their own daughter, they praise that the Murdaugh family can find some peace after this tragic loss. They sincerely hopes that someone will come forward and cooperate with the police so that the perpetrator of these senseless crimes can be brought to justice. The police have classified the deaths of Paul and Maggie as a double murder. However, there are currently no suspects, even though the investigation is still ongoing. Many have speculated whether their murders may be related to Mallory's previous boating accident. But this connection has not been confirmed. Everyone present on the boat that day provided their fingerprints and DNA samples, which did not match those found on the phone of Maggie. While details about the case remain largely undisclosed, it's known that the Murdaugh family had several enemies and received threats, but they ignored these threats. Mallory's death is not the only one linked to the Murdaugh family. Years ago, their 50-year-old housekeeper was found dead. On February 26, 2018, she allegedly tripped and fell to her death. The Murdaughs paid her family $500,000, and the case was not pursued further. Before that, on July 8, 2015, the body of 19-year-old Stephen Smith, who supposedly had a relationship with Murdaugh's family's eldest son, was discovered on a sandy road. Stephen's face was badly beaten, with a hole on the right side of his forehead and numerous bruises and cuts on his body. However, his clothes and shoes were intact, and his phone and car keys stayed in his pocket. Stephen's car was found several miles away. The medical examiner determined Stephen was hit by a car, despite the lack of skid marks, headlight fragments, or any evidence of an accident. The blow only affected his head. It was suggested that a large vehicle, like a truck, might have struck his head with its side mirror, but the origin of the hole in his head was unexplained. It was also odd that his keys and phone remained in his pocket after such a strong impact. Many believed he had been beaten to death, yet the police closed the case. Rumor has it that everyone is afraid of getting involved with the powerful Murdaugh family, which led to these cases remaining unexplored. In 2021, Connor, one of the boat passengers, also sued the Murdaugh family for trying to blame him as the boat's driver. In memory of Mallory, a non-profit charity called Mall's Buddy was created, which raises funds to build a new animal shelter in Hampton County, South Carolina. Alex Murdaugh was arrested in July 2022 after a Culloden County grand jury returned an indictment charging him with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime in the deaths of Maggie and Paul. The indictment said Alex shot his wife with a rifle and shot his son with a shotgun. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole on all 4 counts on March 3, 2023. However, Alex maintained his innocence. He soon filed for a new trial, alleging that the court clerk had tampered with the jury, a new trial court judge denied the request in January 2024. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Catherine Gowing. Catherine Gowing was a 37-year-old veterinarian from Ireland who had a passion for traveling and nature. One of her favorite places was the outskirts of Wales in the UK. Mold, a small town in North Wales with a population of around 10,000, is known for its restaurants, pubs, markets, and shops. It was in this town that Catherine lived. Born in 1975 into a large farming family, she was one of the youngest daughters. Her father dedicated his life to agriculture while her mother worked as a teacher. Throughout the long summer holidays, the family would work together on the farm, cultivating a strong work ethic in their children. As a result, the children eagerly participated in farming activities from an early age. Catherine always dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, so she loved working with the animals on her father's farm. The beautiful countryside captivated her, deepening her affection for rural life. Moving to Mold aligned perfectly with her desires. Catherine dedicated herself to her studies, graduating from St. Brandon's High School and then attending community college in Barry. Not only was Catherine a dedicated student, but she also excelled academically, particularly in the natural sciences, where she ranked third in the country based on her exam results. This achievement led many to believe she had a promising future ahead. After completing her secondary education, she pursued her dream of studying veterinary medicine at the University of Budapest in Hungary. At university, Catherine formed a close group of friends, including Jane Doyle, an older friend from Ireland. They shared a deep understanding. Together, they spent their free time studying, relaxing, and attending social events, all while pursuing their shared passion for veterinary medicine. After graduating as a vet, Jane found a job at a veterinary clinic in Mold, North Wales, and moved there. She then recommended Catherine for a vacancy when it became available. From the moment of interview, the clinic staff were attracted to Catherine. With her cheerful, positive attitude and high level of expertise, she demonstrated a strong passion for working with animals, winning the trust of everyone. Catherine was an outstanding psychologist, which allowed her to connect easily with the owners of her animal patients. These qualities quickly made her one of the most popular veterinarians in the city. The girls fell in love with their new environment, but since they didn't own any property, the veterinary clinic provided their accommodation, which they weren't particularly fond of. To reduce expenses, they decided to rent a house together in a nearby village called New Brighton, just a 10-minute drive from work. The year 2012 marked the peak of Catherine's and Jane's lives. At that time, Catherine was 37 years old and had been working at the veterinary clinic for a year and a half, building a strong reputation. She was attractive and charming, and her soft Irish accent attracted many men. However, she wasn't interested in starting a family yet and remained focused on her work with animals. Even when she agreed to go on dates, those relationships usually didn't last long. In October, Jane planned a weekend trip to visit her family and asked Catherine to cover her shifts at work for a few days. Jane expressed that she not only wanted to visit Ireland, but was also considering the possibility of moving back permanently to care for her elderly parents. Understanding this need, Catherine agreed to help. On October 12, 2012, the day Jane was set to leave, Catherine finished her work shift at 8 p.m. as usual. She then went to a nearby store to do some shopping. CCTV footage captured her at the store entrance at 8:06 p.m. At that time, Catherine was wearing blue jeans and a brown zip-up jacket, and she carried a bright brown bag across her body. She spent about 30 minutes shopping in the store. After she was seen on camera in different departments, she was recorded again as she left, carrying a plastic bag and a pizza box. This was the last sighting of her. Since the woman lived alone, her disappearance went unnoticed at first. The following Sunday, October 14th, Catherine was scheduled to meet a work colleague for lunch, but she never contacted him. She didn't show up and ignored his attempts to reach her. This worried her friend, who had known Catherine for a long time and found her sudden silence unusual. Initially, a coworker assumed that Catherine was just sick and resting at home. The situation became urgent when Jane returned from Ireland on Sunday evening and discovered that Catherine was not home. Her car was also missing, and strangely the front door was unlocked. Jane searched the house for any signs of her friend's location but found nothing. Catherine wasn't answering her calls, and the house was filled with a strong smell of cleaning products, which struck Jane as odd. She also noticed that Catherine's personal items, like her car keys, handbag, wallet, and mobile phone, were missing. Jane assumed that Catherine had gone home for the weekend as planned. Exhausted, Jane went to bed despite not having slept well and knowing she needed to wake up early for her shift. She felt confident that Catherine would reach out to her in the morning, and perhaps they would see each other at the veterinary clinic where Jane worked. Jane woke up and looked around her house again, but there was still no sign of her friend. Her calls and messages to Catherine went unanswered. She then went to work, hoping to find her there, but Catherine didn't show up at the clinic. Instead of being angry about her absence, the clinic management was worried. They knew she hadn't been in touch since Friday when she left work. During that time, a few people received a brief text message from her, which surprised everyone because it didn't sound like her usual style. These messages were never shared publicly. Concerned for her safety, the employees decided to contact the police. Jane spent the entire day trying to reach Catherine, but her calls went unanswered. After finishing work, she went directly to the police station to report Catherine's disappearance. She shared details about Catherine's recent life, which helped the police eliminate her as a suspect. Jane also mentioned that Catherine's car was missing, which could potentially provide a clue to the investigation. The police quickly began their investigation by interviewing Catherine's friends and acquaintances. Everyone commented on her sense of responsibility, never changing her plans without informing someone. This raised concerns that something terrible might have happened to her. Police obtained surveillance camera footage that showed Catherine's movements from the veterinary clinic to a nearby store. After she left the parking lot, her trail went cold, making it impossible to track her any further. Catherine's parents, who live in Ireland, were promptly informed of the situation. They mentioned that their daughter had not visited them over the weekend and that they hadn't seen or heard from her in several days. Catherine's sister-in-law flew in from Wales to assist the police in the investigation and the search for Catherine. Immediately, they turned to the public through the media to gather any information about her. Unfortunately, no useful information was received. No information was received until October 16th. During this time, police believed that Catherine might have been a victim of a crime. While no blood stains were found, but police did discover fresh male DNA on her bed linen during an inspection of the victim's house. They also found a piece of cloth tied around the bedpost. It appeared that someone had come to see her while her friend was away, tied her up, and then had an intimate encounter with her. Forensic experts discovered evidence at the scene and sent it to the lab for analysis. On the evening of October 14th, while Jane was trying to contact Catherine, she received a call from Clive Sharp, Catherine's then 40-year-old boyfriend. They had argued shortly before Catherine went missing. And now Clive wanted to attract Jane's attention and buy her a present. However, Jane did not answer his phone. Before this incident, Catherine and Clive had been dating for several months. Clive, who worked as a sales consultant, lived about 150 kilometers away from Jane and Catherine's home. Despite the distance, he frequently visited them. Catherine met Clive through a dating app, and Jane was already acquainted with him. Clive often spent time at their house, but Catherine felt uncomfortable around him and preferred to leave whenever he arrived. This information reached the police, prompting them to investigate Clive's background more closely. The day after Catherine was reported missing, the police arrested Clive Sharp on suspicion of her murder. At that point, however, the investigation lacked both Catherine's body and any concrete evidence against him. Charges could not be brought against the man, so police couldn't detain him for long without evidence. However, they did obtain permission to search his car and collected material for DNA analysis, which was sent for examination. At the same time, police gathered information on the main suspect in the veterinarian's disappearance. At the same time, the police gathered information about Clive. They checked his police record. Clive has a criminal record. Despite his charming appearance, he spent 14 years in prison. His crimes were mainly sexual assault. He was first convicted of such acts at the age of 16, when he sent obscene letters and was aggressive towards a number of girls. At 17, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for rape after attacking a 15-year-old girl and threatening her with a piece of glass. After his release, it seems that Clive tried to turn his life around. He went into hiding for a while, got married, and had a daughter with his wife, Gillian. For many years, he remained off the radar of police and was not involved in any reported crimes. However, his attempts to build a normal family life did not last long. Gillian died of drug addiction. This may have had a huge impact on him. In 1995, at 26, Clive was imprisoned again for sexually assaulting his friend's wife, receiving a 5-year sentence. Just a few months after his release, he was incarcerated once more, this time for a more serious crime. He attacked a woman, bound her, raped her, and threatened her with a knife, resulting in an 8-year sentence. Remarkably, he was granted parole after serving just 5 years. In 2003, he was released and remarried. By 2011, he had ended a previous relationship and was now in a tense relationship with his girlfriend, Catherine Gowing, who had gone missing. The police found this suspicious coincidence. As a result, Clive Sharp became the prime suspect and was arrested. While in prison, he attended a specialist program designed to help sex offenders control their urges. In this program, he publicly detailed his disturbing behavior, including tying up women and threatening them. After committing the violence, he envisions 2 outcomes. He will lose interest and release the victim, or he will fantasize about killing them, envisioning scenarios in which he strangles or drowns them. The program was discontinued in 2017 after convincing evidence that it did not help solve the problem of sex offenders. While in prison, Clive claimed he had an alibi for the time when Catherine disappeared, saying he was visiting relatives. Interestingly, his daughter and her stepfather supported his claim, stating they saw him that weekend and he appeared calm. However, this did not rule out the possibility that Clive could have harmed Catherine. He could have attacked her, disposed of her body, and then gone to visit his relatives. The police examined this information for inconsistencies in Clive's story and increased their scrutiny. They soon discovered that Clive Sharp was lying. DNA test results from Catherine's bed showed a 100% match with samples taken from Clive. This indicated that he had sexual intercourse with Catherine. No one believed that the encounter was consensual. Catherine had disliked Clive and actively avoided any communication with him. The search for Catherine continued, but hopes of her safe return were slim, especially after Clive revealed he had violent fantasies. Just 2 days later, a couple walking near the abandoned Pin Flame Quarry, just a few miles from Catherine's home, discovered the burned-out car. They quickly called the police. Although the car was badly damaged, the police were quick to confirm that it belonged to Catherine. By this time, news of Catherine's murder had spread throughout the community. However, no body was found in the car, and no further evidence of what had happened had emerged. As a result, many had given up hope of finding Catherine alive. Meanwhile, Clive Sharp continued to deny any involvement in her disappearance. On October 19, the prosecutor's office concluded that they had enough evidence to charge him with Catherine's murder. Even without a body, preparations began for a long and contentious trial, with the prosecution attempting to gather all available evidence. The investigation into Clive's guilt and the search for her body is ongoing near Catherine's home, where her burnt-out car was discovered. The search involves police, volunteers, helicopters, dogs and divers who have checked all the nearby waters. On January 7, 2013, Clive had not confessed to the murder. However, the search did not last long, as divers soon found human remains in a lake near a quarry, close to the location of the burned car. Dismembered body parts were found in the reservoir, approximately 3 kilometers away. All of the remains were sent to a laboratory for testing. Experts determined that the body parts belonged to Catherine. Unfortunately, as some body parts were missing, the cause of death could not be determined. After an extensive search of the reservoir, no further remains were found. The parts that were found were sent back to Ireland for Catherine's family. Catherine's funeral was held in County Offaly, Ireland, where her family received support. Clive Sharp's trial began on January 14, 2013. Unexpectedly, he confessed to his crimes at the outset of the trial, on the advice of his lawyer, which significantly accelerated the proceedings. However, this was not because he felt remorse, but because he had little choice, as the prosecution had overwhelming evidence against him, including DNA and the cloth used to bind the victim. While the prosecution presented a detailed account of the harrowing events, Clive remained evasive and did not fully explain what transpired in the house. According to the prosecutor, on October 12, 2012, Clive broke into Catherine's home while she was alone. He monitored her until she went to bed, then entered the house and attacked her in the bedroom, restraining her to the bed. It is believed he covered her mouth to stop her screaming for help before raping her repeatedly and eventually strangling her. After the attack, Clive went to buy cleaning supplies. He was captured on surveillance cameras at the store where Catherine had been seen alive the previous day. He bought garbage bags, cleaning products, a can of gasoline, and a Halloween mask from a nearby construction store. He also acquired a hacksaw and some blades. Upon returning to Catherine's house, he began to dismember her body, packing the pieces into bags and loading them into his car. He then cleaned the crime scene meticulously, making it impossible for forensic scientists to determine where he had dismembered her. He disposed of the remains in the water and destroyed all her belongings, including her car, which he soaked with gasoline and set on fire. To cover up his actions, Clive sold his old car and bought a new one the very next day. He boasted about this new car to Jane, while she was trying to learn what had happened to Catherine. The old car was located, and the police obtained a search warrant. During the search, they discovered fabric that matched the material used to restrain the Catherine, along with blood stains and Clive's DNA. Additionally, geolocation data from his mobile phone confirmed that Clive was near the lake and at the location where the burnt car was found right after the crime. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Clive refused to speak about the crime during the investigation. Another shocking detail emerged: the intended victim of Clive that night may have been another woman for whom he also had feelings. He tried to break into her house around 10 p.m. on the same night he attacked Catherine. Although they had been involved previously, she ended the relationship due to his rude behavior. When Clive tried to tie her up and harm her, she told him to stop and leave, which he complied with. Clive drove to Catherine's house to fulfill his disturbing desire. Around midnight, he parked nearby where he could see her house clearly. Recorded on CCTV, he waited until about an hour after she went to bed before taking action. After the attack, he returned to his car and spent an hour and a half reflecting on what he had done. He went back to Catherine's house around 3 a.m., knowing she was alone and using a key that Jane had given him, which eliminated any barriers. During the trial, Clive confessed but offered few new details. He kept his head down and avoided looking at the prosecution or Catherine's family. Ultimately, Clive Sharp was found guilty of murdering Catherine Gowing. The prosecution requested a minimum sentence of 42 years, but due to his guilty plea, this was reduced to 37 years. A monument to Catherine was later built in the Catholic Church in Buckley, funded by employees of the veterinary clinic where she worked. A year and a half after the crime, Catherine's friend Jane was still deeply affected following Catherine's death. Jane left her job at the veterinary clinic and moved to northwest England to start over. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Michelle Herndon. Michelle Herndon was born in 1981 in a small Florida town with a population of just 7,000. After finishing school, she enrolled at the University of Florida in Gainesville in 1999. Michelle joined the Peace Corps as a volunteer, assisting both people and animals. Michelle suffered from chronic, debilitating migraines. These attacks caused her to experience severe pain on a daily basis, accompanied by symptoms such as nausea and extreme sensitivity to light, smell, and sound. Despite trying medications, herbal teas, and numerous visits to the doctor, nothing helped ease her pain. In 2005, a new school year began. Michelle returned to university to continue her studies. To cover her tuition and rent, she worked at a fitness center. With limited funds, she rented a small apartment far from campus. At that time, Michelle was in a complicated long-distance relationship with a guy named Jason. Her best friend, Jessica, whom she met at university, lived on campus. They worked together, talked frequently, and often visited each other. Jessica's roommate was Oliver O'Quinn, a 27-year-old student from Georgia. Oliver was a great roommate and a friend to both Jessica and Michelle. The three have often spent time together. Michelle shared her relationship problems with Jason, and Jessica was always supportive. Oliver offered advice from a male perspective. Being a bit older and more experienced, they often valued his wisdom. Oliver, a nurse in the hospital's surgical department, began helping Michelle manage her debilitating migraines after learning about them. The hospital provided strong medications that greatly relieved her pain, allowing Michelle to finally enjoy life without those severe headaches. Surprisingly, Oliver had previously served in the Air Force and worked in Africa. Michelle dreamed of moving to Africa to help animals. She and Oliver could talk endlessly about it. Michelle decided to take a break from her long-distance relationship with her boyfriend, Jason. During this time, she met Scott, a funny musician who played guitar in a band. Michelle felt very comfortable with Scott. However, in mid-October 2005, Jason returned and pleaded with Michelle to reconcile, and she agreed. She began making plans to spend Thanksgiving together. Meanwhile, Oliver was not impressed with any of Michelle's boyfriends, considering them frivolous and unreliable. The reason was that Oliver was in love with Michelle. Many acquaintances had suspected this for a while, noting the way he interacted with her and the way he looked at her. Oliver was constantly involved in her relationships and even accompanied her on dates, which seemed awkward, but Michelle didn't mind. She believed that they were just friends and didn't see anything wrong with that. At the end of October 2005, Michelle met with Jessica to share some exciting news. She and Jason had decided that she would move in with him, 500 kilometers away. Jessica was thrilled for Michelle, congratulated her, and asked about Oliver, but Michelle didn't respond. Michelle began getting ready for the move, balancing her busy schedule of studies, work, volunteer activities, and now packing and buying household essentials. Despite the hectic pace, she enjoyed these tasks. As a result, Michelle and Jessica saw each other less frequently, usually only catching up during their weekend volunteer work. They planned to have dinner together on November 9, 2005, looking forward to catching up and sharing stories. However, Michelle didn't show up for the meeting that evening, which was uncharacteristic of her. Jessica tried to call her friend, but she didn't answer. She assumed Michelle was upset about something and believed that was why she didn't show up. Jessica left several messages asking Michelle to explain what happened and why she was upset, but Michelle never responded. Jessica decided not to wait any longer and went home. When she got home, her phone was dead, so she charged it and went to bed. The next morning, on November 10th, Jessica discovered many voice messages on her phone. One was from the fitness center where both girls worked. The administrator asked about Michelle's absence, as she had not been at work for a couple of days. Their shifts didn't overlap, so they didn't see each other at work, leaving Jessica unaware of Michelle's absences. Understanding the significance of this project to Michelle, Jessica became anxious. She worried that something might have happened to Michelle. Jessica tried calling Michelle again, but there was no response. She then reached out to all her friends, but none of them knew where Michelle was. Concerned, Jessica got into her car and headed to Michelle's house to check on her. Meanwhile, after learning about her daughter's disappearance, Michelle's mother also drove to another city to find her. The drive took about an hour. When Jessica, who arrived first at Michelle's residence, got there, she saw police officers had sealed off the area as a crime scene. It was then that she received the heartbreaking news: Michelle had died. Nearby, she noticed a distressed Jason. Michelle's mother later arrived at the house and made the horrifying discovery that her daughter was dead. There was no sign of forced entry into the apartment. All the doors and windows were closed, the lights were off, but the TV was on very loudly. Nothing had been stolen. Police found the body cold, indicating that Michelle had been dead for some time. She was lying face down with her left arm underneath her body. There were no wounds, bruises, or injuries that would indicate a violent death. It appeared that Michelle had fallen asleep and never woke up. Police believe that Michelle, 24, died of natural causes. Her body was sent for an autopsy and police conducted standard procedures, interviewed neighbors, and asked forensic experts to examine the scene. No fingerprints or DNA were found near the body, and neighbors did not hear or see anything suspicious. Police believe Michelle had used illegal drugs and died of an overdose. Police searched the apartment for drugs or paraphernalia but found nothing. There were only a few bottles of beer in the refrigerator. Next to Michelle's body on the bed was a half-empty beer bottle, which had only her fingerprints on it. As a precaution, the opened bottle was sent to a lab to be tested for any foreign substances or possible poisoning. Tests showed that nothing had been added to the beer. The medical examiner was unable to determine the cause of Michelle's death. She appeared to be completely healthy, with no illnesses other than migraines, which were unlikely to have been a significant factor. This led to many questions about how a young, healthy girl could fall asleep and not wake up. The position of her body was unusual for a natural death, raising further doubts. The expert concluded that Michelle died on the night of November 8th. The medical examiner is continuing a more thorough investigation to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, the police are looking into who she might have been in contact with around that time. Initially, questions emerged regarding Michelle's boyfriend, Jason, who was the first to arrive at her apartment and call the police. How did he end up there when he lived 500 kilometers away in a different city? Police brought Jason to the police station for questioning. Jason explained that he hadn't been able to contact Michelle for 2 days. Concerned, he drove over 5 hours overnight to check on her. Upon arriving on the morning of November 10th, he knocked on her door, but no one answered. He continued calling and knocking without success. Seeing Michelle's car in the parking lot, hearing her dog barking inside, and her phone ringing, he feared something was wrong. Looking through the window, he saw Michelle lying motionless on the bed. He then immediately called 911. The police arrived, broke down the door and found Michelle's body in the apartment. Jason appeared very sad and distressed. He had an alibi for the time of Michelle's death because he was in another city, so the police released him. The medical examiner provided new information after a careful examination of Michelle's body. A small needle wound was found on her left hand, located under her body. Police contacted her doctor to see if Michelle had undergone any tests or procedures the day before, but the doctor said no. The needle wound was in an unusual location, atypical for an injection. No illegal substances were found in her home and toxicology tests showed no illegal substances in her system. Police also observed that a trash bag may have been missing from Michelle's apartment. They speculate that someone injected something into Michelle, causing her death, and then threw the trash bag away to remove the evidence. Police searched the trash cans on the street near her home and found Michelle's trash because it had not been collected. They found checks and letters with her name on them, along with a syringe and a bottle of painkillers. This prescription drug is very dangerous and an overdose can be fatal. Toxicology testing for this drug had never been done before because it requires a special test. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy had never encountered this drug in her many years of practice. When the final test was done, it was found that Michelle's body contained a very high concentration of the drug, which caused her death without leaving any trace. This drug is not commonly used for general use. It is mainly used by anesthesiologists during surgery. The police interviewed Michelle's friend Jessica and learned about her complicated relationships with Jason, Scott, and Oliver. This information intrigued the police, as they suspected that one of these men might have harmed Michelle out of jealousy. However, who could it have been? Jason had already been ruled out as a suspect. According to a friend, Michelle's relationship with Scott was very brief and hadn't really developed. He understood when Michelle returned to her ex and stayed out of her life. Michelle was deeply in love with Jason and wanted to be with him, while she saw Oliver as just a friend, although he wanted more from her. Oliver soon became a suspect. In hindsight, Jessica realized there were many warning signs in Oliver's behavior. He followed Michelle everywhere, but it seemed sweet and innocent, so no one saw him as a threat. During a conversation with the police, Michelle's grief-stricken mother mentioned that the last time she spoke to her daughter was around 11 p.m. on November 7th. This made her the last person to speak with Michelle. Michelle's final words to her mother were that Oliver was supposed to come over to help her fill out some documents. The police found it strange that she invited a guy over late at night, especially when he had feelings for her and she didn't like him. There had to be a reason for this. It was revealed that Oliver worked in the hospital's surgical department and had access to a variety of drugs, including painkillers. He had previously helped Michelle with her migraines. Michelle's landlord, Peter, came to the police station to share a strange story about her. About a week before Michelle died, Peter needed to pick up some things from her apartment but couldn't get in touch with her. This was unusual for Michelle, who always paid her rent on time, kept the apartment clean, and didn't ignore him. Concerned, Peter went to the apartment and knocked on the door, but it took a long time for anyone to answer. Finally, a shirtless man with messy black hair and glasses opened the door. He looked outside for a moment and said that this wasn't a good time. Peter explained that he needed to get his things. However, the man slammed the door shut and told Peter to come back in a few hours. Peter was confused and did not understand the situation. After he left, Michelle called him back to apologize for the unpleasant situation. She explained that she had a severe migraine and her friend was treating her. Peter saw a picture of Oliver and recognized him as the man in Michelle's apartment. The police found a butterfly needle in Michelle's bag at her apartment. This type of needle is often used to inject drugs. Jessica confirmed that Oliver had given Michelle medication to relieve her migraine. Jessica also mentioned that Michelle was afraid of regular needles, so Oliver used a small butterfly syringe instead. Michelle could not inject the needle herself because she was too afraid to even look at it. If she injected the drug incorrectly, she would die immediately. So the drug was administered by someone with medical knowledge. This again pointed to Oliver's involvement. The police finally understood why Michelle had remained friends with Oliver and invited him to her home. He had provided her with a strong painkiller. Police did not find Oliver's fingerprints on the syringe or vial. He may have worn gloves and disposed of them elsewhere, leaving only Michelle's DNA. To charge him, the police would need to link the syringe to Oliver. The vials had a unique identification number, indicating they came from the department where Oliver worked. The drugs were stored in a special refrigerator that required a patient number and staff name to retrieve the drugs. This discovery confirmed that Oliver had taken the vials. Later, the police went to the hospital to talk to Oliver, but he did not show up for work. It was discovered that he had been fired on November 9th, shortly after Michelle's murder. Police suspected that he had been fired for using dangerous drugs, but hospital management denied this, saying that Oliver had been fired because his skills did not meet their standards. However, rumors circulated in the hospital that Oliver had been fired due to a shortage of medication. The police found out that Oliver was working at another clinic. They went to the clinic and spoke to a nurse who was surprised to see them. Oliver was then taken to the police station for questioning. He said that he had heard about Michelle's death from someone and expressed his condolences. The police were surprised and asked if they were close friends. Oliver replied that they were just acquaintances. The police then asked why he talked to her on the phone every day. Oliver did not answer. Instead, he said that he had to get back to work and left. At that time, the police did not have a warrant for his arrest. Oliver calmly arrived on campus and collected his things. The guy told Jessica at the end that he was going on vacation and left. It turned out that Oliver went to visit his ex-wife and daughter and then flew to his homeland in Ireland. There, he received a license and got a job at the hospital. After the police took the bottle of painkillers used on Michelle for analysis, the DNA test results came back. Confirmed that there was Oliver's DNA on the bottle cap, indicating that he had injected Michelle with a fatal dose of the drug. The police discovered that Oliver had left but was unable to act, despite having a warrant for his arrest. Extradition to the United States is often controversial for countries that oppose the death penalty. In this case, an Irish journalist alerted the police to Michelle's story. He proposed publishing an article detailing Michelle's death and highlighting Oliver's possible involvement, including his photograph and arrest warrant, to alert the public. The police approved and the article was published in April 2006. Upon reading the article, Oliver fled the country to Africa, where he had previously worked, fearing public backlash. He was eventually tracked down, arrested, and extradited to the US, where he was jailed. Oliver was charged with Michelle's murder but pleaded not guilty. His lawyers argued it was an accident, claiming that Michelle had requested Oliver to inject her with drugs for pain relief. That evening, Oliver miscalculated the dose, inadvertently giving her a lethal amount, leading to her death. The dose administered was 4 times the lethal amount, which was surprising since no one could believe an experienced nurse familiar with the drug would make such an error. Oliver did not apologize to the deceased's family for this mistake. The prosecutor had a different theory, suggesting that Oliver killed Michelle out of jealousy and revenge, as he did not want to share her with another man. It was alleged that he deliberately gave her the fatal dose with the intent to murder. During the trial, Witnesses stated that Oliver was in love with Michelle and had been stalking her. Additionally, Oliver's cellmate testified that Oliver confessed to being deeply in love with Michelle, but she did not return his feelings. Oliver overheard a conversation between Michelle and Jason, where she professed her love for Jason and said Oliver meant nothing to her. Feeling humiliated by this, Oliver allegedly decided to take revenge by ending her life. Oliver had gained Michelle's trust through his medical care. However, he exploited this trust by injecting her with a quadruple lethal dose of medication. As a result, the jury convicted Oliver O'Quinn of first-degree murder, and he received a life sentence without the chance for parole. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of affair Elodie Kulik. At around midnight on January 11, 2002, the French Rescue Service received a heartbreaking call. A woman, her voice panicked, screamed that she had been kidnapped. Other voices could be heard in the background before the noise increased, and the attackers took over the phone, cutting off the call forever. The call left the rescue service extremely worried, but the operators were unable to gather any useful information. Attempts to call the number back were unsuccessful as it was either out of coverage or switched off. The situation led to an investigation into one of the most unusual crimes the police had ever encountered. They had no information, not even the name of the caller. The only option was to investigate the mobile phone number, but at the time, the technology could not accurately track the caller's location, so the technology was of no help. In the early morning hours of January 11, 2002, at around 7 a.m., a random driver in the rural area of Bacardi made a disturbing discovery. He noticed a car that appeared to have been abandoned in a ditch, with damage to the vehicle and the passenger door open. Concerned that the car had been stolen and abandoned, he called the police. When asked if anyone else was nearby, he replied that there was no one around. After making the call, he continued on his way. Since it was a remote area, it took some time for the police to arrive, and they arrived at the scene around 8 a.m. A Peugeot 106 was found upside down in a ditch, which seemed unusual as there was a clear and safe stretch of highway nearby, making it unlikely that it had ended up there by accident. There were no signs of braking or skidding on the road, suggesting the car had intentionally left the sidewalk at a high rate of speed. The keys were still in the ignition, but there was no sign of the driver or any passengers. Police used the license plate to identify the owner. Affair Elodie Kulik, a 24-year-old bank employee who lived nearby. While investigating the abandoned car, her bag was discovered inside, raising concerns for police. The bag contained her money, cards, and keys, but she had disappeared without a trace. Police went to the bank where the affair worked. Bank employees told them she had not shown up for work that day. They then contacted the local hospital, but there were no reports of any victims matching Affair's description. That morning, Affair's father contacted the police to report her absence. He explained that he had tried calling her cell phone, but she did not answer and did not make contact, which was very unusual for her. Normally, if she had any problems, she would always notify her family if she would be late or unable to come home. However, this time, she did not respond and it appeared that she had disappeared. Police began searching the area where her car was found and decided to release a photo to raise public awareness of her disappearance. On the morning of Saturday, January 12, 2002, a worker from a nearby farm went to a landfill 12 kilometers from the station. In the distance, he saw what he initially thought was a tree trunk. However, as he got closer, he was horrified to discover the disfigured body of a woman. He quickly called the police to report his horrific discovery. When the officers arrived at the scene, they were confronted with a horrifying sight, the partially burned and disfigured body of a young woman, showing clear signs of a violent death. Tests are needed to confirm the identity of the body. The body was discovered nearly 6 kilometers away from where her car was found the previous day, which was unusual. Police noted that this area is not frequented by many visitors. It is isolated and not a tourist destination. This suggests that the suspect is likely a local resident. The crime scene was secured and thoroughly searched for evidence. The gendarme discovered a fresh cigarette, but that may have been discarded by the potential killer. Additionally, a condom containing male fluid was located next to the body. Police focused on finding tire tread marks from any vehicle that might have brought the affair to this location, but they were unsuccessful in locating any. All collected evidence was sent to forensic scientists for analysis. On January 12, the police contacted Affair's parents to inform them of the sad news. When the family learned of the incident, the parents were devastated by their daughter's death. Overwhelmed with grief, the mother attempted to end her life. She survived but fell into a coma, remaining in that state for years until her death in 2011. The desperate father was determined to find his daughter's killer. Affair was a highly intelligent and educated young woman. She studied law in northern France and later returned to her hometown of Péronne. At just 23, she was offered a position at a bank, where she excelled and quickly became the youngest director in the bank's history. She took great pride in her career accomplishments. In addition to her career success, Affair was also very beautiful, with blonde hair and blue eyes. The forensic examination of Affair's car determined that it was traveling at a low speed. There were no signs of collision with another vehicle, raising the possibility that someone inside the car might have deliberately driven it into the ditch. When police checked Affair's mobile phone, they found a call to the local rescue service shortly after midnight. The call ended suddenly after she managed to scream. Police retrieved a 26-second recording filled with noise and unidentified male voices. While this recording did not provide clear evidence, it was notable because it indicated male involvement during the incident. The autopsy results showed that Affair died painfully from strangulation, and DNA evidence indicated that she had been raped. However, this DNA did not match any profiles in the database, suggesting her attacker had no prior criminal history. Police believed that the suspect's careless handling of the DNA would eventually lead him to reveal himself again. However, this assumption raised concerns, as it could result in another victim, so they could not afford to wait. Police organized street patrols and collected DNA samples from all male acquaintances of the affair. If these efforts did not lead to results, the search would expand to the surrounding area near the crime scene. The instincts of the gendarmes proved correct. Just 10 days after finding Affair's body, a police commissioner from another precinct arrested a man named Kirill, who had a history of sexual violence. He was in the area on the night of the disappearance and later attacked another woman, who reported the incident. While Kirill admitted to harassing this woman, claiming it was just harmless flirting, he denied any involvement in Affair's murder. The investigation of Kirill involved checking his car, which had scratches containing gray paint. This paint matched the color of the Peugeot 106 driven by Affair. DNA samples were taken from Kirill for comparison. However, the analysis showed that the paint did not match Affair's car, and Kirill's DNA did not match any evidence from the crime scene. As a result, Kirill was released, and further inquiries into Affair's acquaintances did not produce any new leads. The case has no prime suspect and no new leads. It seems the investigation has reached a dead end. Meanwhile, Affair's grieving father Jackie remains closely involved in the investigation and begins his own investigations. In order to quickly find the culprit, he ensures that the case is widely reported in the media, hoping that this will lead to new leads. On April 15, 2002, 3 months after Affair's body was discovered, new clues emerged in the case. The police received a detailed report from audio experts who had analyzed the recording of Affair's last call to emergency services. The experts carefully filtered out the background noise and identified two distinct male voices among the cries for help. One voice was calm and tried to reassure the victim, while the other, more aggressive, argued that she needed to be killed. They noted that the attackers had a heavy accent typical of an area called Picard, which happened to be close to where Affair's body was found. However, this information did not make the police's task any easier. They still lacked data, and the search for a new suspect was slow, with the assumption that two men were involved. After 6 months of unproductive investigation, the police department received a call from a farmer in Turtree. On July 8, 2002, he reported discovering a young girl's body on a haystack while heading to work. The shocking scene also revealed another mutilated body. Forensic experts, horrified by the brutality, noted that her limbs were dislocated and her body showed signs of having been run over by a vehicle. This location was only 30 kilometers away from where Affair had previously been found. The victim was identified as Patricia, a clerk who was known for riding her bicycle. She had gone missing just days before the farmer's discovery. Notably, similar items were found at this crime scene. Patricia was recognized as a beautiful girl who worked in a restaurant in Alberta. It was clear to police that these cases were linked, as such violent incidents had never occurred in this previously peaceful area. Witnesses who saw Patricia shortly before her death reported that a black sedan was following her bicycle on the street. At the time, they did not think much of it. Unfortunately, this was all the information the police could gather. The witnesses could not remember the car's make, model, or license plate. However, the police believed this crime was connected to a previous case, and new information about the black sedan helped narrow down the search. The media quickly picked up the story, increasing public fear and spreading rumors about a possible serial killer. The police's struggle to solve the case led to the discovery of a third body on August 21, 2002. In Villa-Brentoni, a van was found abandoned near the railroad tracks. And inside it, police discovered a third young girl who had been wounded by a bladed weapon and died from internal bleeding. Unlike the earlier victims, this girl's identity was unknown because no one had reported her missing. The police spoke with local residents and learned about the parents of a daughter who had not returned home the night before. They thought she was out with friends. Upon investigation, they recognized the victim as their 18-year-old daughter, Crestel. She was killed approximately 40 kilometers from where the first victim was found. In just 7 months, the gendarmes encountered 3 similar murders of young girls, each caught by the criminals at night on roads between settlements. The locations of these crimes on the map created a triangle that the media called the Triangle of Death. This situation caused public anxiety to escalate, leading residents to hold a memorial procession to express their fear for safety. Even with more police patrols and checkpoints, attempts to gather new evidence and testimonies from other potential victims were unsuccessful. However, by the end of November 2002, the investigation into the second Patricia victim's murder produced new leads. DNA found on the victim's clothing identified a suspect named Jean-Paul Conti, marking an important breakthrough for the police. Police arrived to question Conti, a man who had served 17 years in prison for a series of rapes. When he saw the police, he was very surprised. He remained calm and did not attract the attention of those around him. His home was located in the Triangle of Death, which included the locations where the 3 victims were found. Conti was arrested in the early morning of November 25, but police needed more evidence to link him to the murders. His DNA was only found on the clothing of the second victim, and there were no traces on the first and third victims. The investigation later determined that he was only involved in the murders of the second and third victims, resulting in a life sentence. In addition, it was confirmed that he could not have been involved in the murder of Affair, as he was in prison at the time. This indicates that the cases of Affair and the other victims are unrelated, revealing that there are at least 2 killers operating in the area, targeting young girls. The investigation resumed with meticulous efforts to identify all mobile devices that may have been in the vicinity where the body and a gray Peugeot 106 were discovered. A total of 14,000 signals were recorded and needed analysis. Specialists undertook a massive task that included reviewing over 600 sent messages, listening to more than 10,000 conversations, collecting 5,500 DNA samples from found mobile phones, and conducting thousands of interviews. Police examined over 500 theories related to the crime, but none provided any leads. The department received numerous anonymous letters identifying various individuals as potential killers. Police followed up on these leads, which consumed a lot of resources, but ultimately did not advance the case. After a lengthy period, police offered a reward of €60,000 for information leading to the capture of the real criminal. However, this also failed to yield results, leaving the police at a standstill. 9 years after Affair's body was discovered, a new police officer joined the investigation. He was a young specialist with a fresh perspective and new skills. He suggested a method that focuses on analyzing the DNA found at the crime scene to search for close relatives of the DNA's owner, rather than just the owner themselves. This innovative technique was used for the first time in France in this case and proved to be a significant breakthrough in the investigation. Progress was made in November 2011 when police identified a relative of the killer. Evidence strongly suggested that the killer was part of the Wired family. It was believed that the elderly man was not involved, meaning that the perpetrator was likely his son. The Wired family had lived in the area for nearly 50 years and their son, Gregory Wired, was a 23-year-old plumber at the time of the murder. To protect the information, police kept his identity a secret for several weeks. However, they were disappointed to discover that Gregory Wired had died in a traffic accident shortly after the Affair murder in November 2003, which was officially ruled a fatal accident. The Gregory's death shortly after Affair's murder explained why his DNA was not found during random sampling of local residents from 2002 to 2010. His profile closely matched the description of the criminal. Gregory, known to his friends as a motorsport racing enthusiast, was cheerful but had a violent streak. He abused alcohol and often lost control when intoxicated, making him prone to aggression. To conduct a DNA examination of the suspect, authorities decided to exhume his body from the cemetery for testing. The results revealed a complete match, identifying one of the killers. The next step for the gendarmerie was to find the owner of the second voice from Affair's last call recording. They began by investigating Gregory's immediate circle. The police aimed not only to piece together the events, but also to ensure that no further threats existed for other young women. While only traces of Gregory were found on the condom at the crime scene, another male voice was clearly captured on the recording. Police then investigated Willie Bardon, a former plumber and bartender who was a close friend of Gregory's. They had many interests in common, and a recording confirmed that it was his voice. Willie lived nearby, and police knew of his past allegations of violence against women, although those incidents did not result in legal action. Witnesses reported that he had chased them in his car. Despite his troubled past, he had no criminal record, which meant that his DNA was not in the police database. He vehemently denied any involvement in the crime and claimed that the police were mistaken. Ultimately, his DNA was not found at the crime scene. In late March 2013, Gregory's ex-girlfriend assisted police in identifying the voices of Gregory and Willie by listening to a recorded phone call. Willie, who had a recognizable accent, was recognized by people who knew him. Despite this evidence, Willie denied any involvement in Affair's death, maintaining his innocence. Some described him as a kind man, a caring husband and father, while others painted a different picture, noting his impulsive behavior, extramarital affairs, alcohol abuse, and repeated advances toward women. Nevertheless, the case against him went to court. The prosecution's case rested largely on the identification of Gregory's girlfriend's voice and several others. Despite the lack of substantial evidence, the court ruled in favor of the prosecution. In 2019, 45-year-old Willie Bardon was convicted of gang rape, kidnapping, and murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. While in custody, he attempted to end his life to prove his innocence. His lawyers quickly filed an appeal, and which was accepted. They argued that the voice on the crucial recording belonged to someone else. Experts analyzed the recording but could not confirm whether it was actually his voice, as it was unclear and discontinuous. This uncertainty raised doubts about the evidence against him. As a result, his conviction was appealed and Willie was acquitted due to insufficient evidence. He was released from prison on September 25, 2020. The story continues. A new trial began, and on July 1, 2021, Willie was convicted again and sentenced to 30 years in prison. His attorney appealed the decision, but the appeal was rejected. The defense team expressed their commitment to doing everything possible to free this innocent man, but he remains in custody.